The marble lobby of Hart Biotech caught the morning light like a cathedral designed for commerce rather than prayer. 47 floors of glass and steel rose above San Francisco's financial district, a monument to innovation that bore one woman's name and carried the weight of 3,000 employees who moved through its gleaming corridors each day. The building had been featured in architectural magazines praised for its fusion of brutalist ambition and organic warmth. But those who worked within its walls knew the truth that photographs could never capture. The warmth existed only in the materials. The ambition belonged entirely to Amelia Hart. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office on the 42nd floor, watching the fog roll across the bay like a slow-moving army laying siege to the city. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, a ghost superimposed over the morning commute below. At 32 years old, she had become the youngest CEO in the biotech industry, a distinction that journalists loved to mention in profiles that inevitably described her as driven, brilliant, and lately something else. Cold. The word appeared in whispers now in the careful phrasing of board members who remembered a different woman from 3 years ago before the company had grown into a giant, before the explosion before David. The name still caught in her throat like a bone she could neither swallow nor expel. David Hart, her husband of 7 years, the man who had believed in her vision when it was nothing more than a graduate thesis in a dream scrawled on napkins in a Berkeley coffee shop. He had been a researcher in her own facility, brilliant in his own right, but content to let her name grace the building while he worked in the labs below, pursuing the kind of pure science that quarterly reports could never adequately value. He had loved her completely, and she had loved him back with a ferocity that surprised them both. And then 14 months ago, a chemical reaction went wrong in Laboratory 7, and the man who had held her hand through every triumph and failure was gone in a flash of heat and light that took less than 3 seconds to end a life that had taken 34 years to build. Amelia pressed her palm against the glass, feeling the cool surface against her skin. The fog was thicker now, swallowing the tops of neighboring buildings, and she found herself grateful for the erasure. Some mornings she could not bear to see the city that had given her everything and then extracted its price. Behind her, the door to her office opened with a soft click. She did not turn around. Only one person entered without knocking, and the footsteps that followed were too small, too hesitant to belong to anyone on her executive team. Lay across the vast expanse of carpet with the careful deliberation of a child navigating unfamiliar territory. At 6 years old, she had her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn jaw, a combination that had once promised a lifetime of spirited arguments around the dinner table. Now those eyes held something else, a watchfulness that no child should possess, as if she were constantly preparing for the next disaster. She wore her school uniform navy blue with white trim, and her backpack hung from one shoulder, with the straps twisted in a way that suggested she had dressed herself this morning, while Amelia answered emails in the car. The girl stopped 3 feet from her mother and waited. She did not speak. She had not spoken in 14 months, not since the day Amelia had knelt on the floor of their living room and tried to explain that Daddy was not coming home, that there had been an accident, that sometimes terrible things happen to good people, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop them. Leia had listened with those dark eyes growing wider and wider, and then she had opened her mouth to scream, and nothing had come out. The doctors called it psychogenic mutism, a trauma response that locked the voice away in some deep vault of the mind where words could no longer reach. They said time might heal it. They said therapy would help. They said many things, and Amelia had tried them all, and still her daughter remained silent. She turned from the window now and knelt to meet Leia at eye level. The girl's face was impossible to read, a mask of composure that Amelia recognized because she wore one herself. Her voice came out softer than she intended. "Ready for school, sweetheart?" Leia nodded once, a small economical movement that conveyed nothing beyond acknowledgement. "Mrs. Patterson will take you down. I have meetings until 3, but I'll pick you up myself today. We can get ice cream on the way home." Another nod. Leia reached into her backpack and produced a piece of paper folded into careful quarters. She held it out to her mother with an expression that might have been hope or might have been resignation. Amelia unfolded the paper and found a drawing rendered in colored pencil. 2 figures stood in a field of green grass beneath a yellow sun, their stick-figure bodies connected by arms that stretched impossibly long to bridge the distance between them. One figure had brown hair drawn in careful curls. The other had straight black hair that fell past its shoulders. Above them, in letters that wobbled but remained legible, Leia had written a single word: together. Something cracked in Amelia's chest, a fault line running through the carefully constructed fortress she had built around her heart. She pulled her daughter close and held her with a fierceness that surprised them both, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and the particular warmth that belonged only to this child, this impossible gift that David had left behind. Together, Amelia whispered into Leia's hair. Always together. The girl's arms wrapped around her mother's neck, holding on with a desperation that belied her small frame. They stayed that way for 30 seconds, maybe 40, until the demands of the morning reasserted themselves and Amelia gently loosened her grip. I love you, she said, looking directly into those dark eyes. I need you to know that. Even when I'm busy, even when I'm not there, I love you more than anything in this world. Leia's lips moved, forming shapes that produced no sound. Her face contorted with the effort of trying to push words through whatever barrier held them captive. Then the struggle passed, replaced by something that looked terribly like acceptance, and she stepped back from her mother's embrace. Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway, a capable woman in her 50s who had served as Amelia's executive assistant for 8 years and had, in the past 14 months, taken on the additional role of shepherding Leia through the gaps in her mother's schedule. She wore concern like a second skin these days, though she was careful never to let it show when Amelia was watching. Her voice carried the practiced cheerfulness of someone who had learned to paper over awkward moments. The car is ready downstairs, Mrs. Hart, and Mr. Chen called to confirm the 10 o'clock with the FDA representatives. Amelia straightened the mask, sliding back into place with an ease born of practice. Tell him I'll be there in 15 minutes. And Patricia, she paused, watching her daughter walk toward the door, with shoulders that seemed too narrow to carry such heavy silence. Make sure the security detail stays close today. I don't want her out of sight for even a moment. Mrs. Patterson's expression flickered with something that might have been concern or might have been pity. Of course, Mrs. Hart, the same protocols as always. The same protocols. 6 months ago, Amelia had tripled the security around her daughter after a tabloid photographer had managed to snap pictures of Leia leaving her therapist's office. The photographs had appeared online within hours, accompanied by headlines that speculated about the mental state of the Hart heiress and questioned whether Amelia was fit to run a company when she could not even protect her own child from public scrutiny. She had responded by hiring a former Secret Service agent to oversee Leia's protection detail and installing monitoring systems throughout their home that would have impressed a small government. The board had expressed concern about the expense. She had reminded them, in terms that left no room for interpretation, that her family's security was not a line item subject to their approval. Leia paused at the door and looked back at her mother. Her hand rose in a small wave, a gesture so ordinary and yet so profound that Amelia felt her throat tighten. She waved back, maintaining her composure, until the door closed and she was alone with the fog and the silence and the weight of everything she could not say. The morning proceeded as mornings did, a relentless procession of meetings and decisions and problems that demanded her attention. The FDA representatives wanted clarification on the clinical trial protocols for their newest drug candidate, a treatment for a rare neurological condition that had shown promising results in early testing. The legal team needed her signature on settlement documents related to a patent dispute that had dragged on for 2 years. The head of R&D reported a breakthrough in the gene therapy division that could potentially add $3 billion to their market valuation pending regulatory approval. Each conversation required a different version of Amelia Hart, the visionary, the negotiator, the strategist, the commander, and she moved between them with the practiced fluidity of an actor who had performed the same role so many times that the lines had become indistinguishable from her actual thoughts. But beneath the performance, in the quiet spaces between words, her mind kept returning to the drawing in her pocket. Together. Such a simple word, and yet it contained everything her daughter could not say aloud. The longing, the fear, the desperate hope that the world might somehow reassemble itself into something recognizable. Amelia understood that hope better than anyone. She carried it herself, a small flame that flickered in the darkness of her grief and refused to be extinguished no matter how many times the wind of reality tried to snuff it out. She had built walls around that flame, protecting it from the cold, but the walls had grown so high and so thick that sometimes she wondered if she had accidentally imprisoned herself along with her hope. The lunch hour came and went without food. She had stopped eating regular meals months ago, sustaining herself instead on coffee and protein bars consumed between appointments. Her assistant had started leaving sandwiches on her desk, which Amelia appreciated in theory, but rarely touched in practice. The body was a machine that required maintenance, nothing more. She would attend to it when she had time. At 2:30, her phone buzzed with a message from the security team. Miss Laya has arrived at the building, proceeding to the executive childcare suite. The executive childcare suite was Amelia's compromise with her board and her conscience. Unable to bear the thought of her daughter spending afternoons in the impersonal environment of an after-school program, she had converted a corner office on the 41st floor into a space designed specifically for Laya. It contained toys and books and art supplies, a small television loaded with educational programming, and comfortable furniture where the girl could rest or play while her mother finished the day's work one floor above. A trained caregiver remained with her at all times, supplemented by the security detail that shadowed her movements throughout the building. It was not ideal. Nothing about their lives was ideal anymore. But it allowed Amelia to know that her daughter was close, that she could reach her in seconds if necessary, that the elevator between their floors represented a barrier she could cross at will. Control. That was what she needed more than anything. The illusion that she could keep the people she loved safe through sheer force of will and careful planning. She finished her last meeting of the day at 3:15 and gathered the documents she needed to review that evening. The stack was substantial, 3 inches of reports and proposals and financial projections that would consume the hours after Leia went to sleep. She placed them in her briefcase with the mechanical precision of long habit and made her way to the elevator. The lobby was its usual afternoon bustle when she stepped out on the ground floor. Employees moved in streams toward the exits, their conversations creating a pleasant hum that filled the vast space. Security personnel maintained their positions at strategic points, their presence unobtrusive but unmistakable. The marble floors gleamed beneath the recessed lighting, polished each night by the cleaning staff, who worked in the hours when the building belonged to shadows and silence. Amelia spotted Laya immediately. The girl stood near the center of the lobby, her small body frozen in place while dozens of people flowed around her like water parting for a stone. Her face had gone pale, her dark eyes wide with something that looked terribly like terror. Tears streamed down her cheeks in silent rivulets, but no sound accompanied them. She was crying without voice, suffering without expression, a child locked in private anguish while the world rushed past without noticing. Amelia's heart seized in her chest. She began moving toward her daughter, her heels clicking against the marble with increasing urgency. But before she could reach Laya, she saw something that made her blood freeze. A man was approaching her daughter. He wore the gray uniform of the janitorial staff, a mop still gripped in one hand, and he was walking toward Laya with deliberate steps. His other hand rose, not reaching for the girl, but moving in the air, forming shapes that Amelia did not recognize. Everything that followed happened in fragments of time that her mind would replay for days afterward. The man drawing closer, his hands continuing their strange movements. Leia's face changing, the terror shifting into something else, something that looked almost like recognition. And then Amelia was running her briefcase abandoned on the marble floor, her voice tearing through the ambient noise of the lobby with a fury that silenced every other sound. "Don't touch my child!" The words exploded from her like weapons aimed at the man in the gray uniform, with all the protective rage of a mother who had already lost too much. She threw herself between him and Leia, her body forming a barrier. Her arms spread wide as if she could physically block any threat through sheer determination. The man stopped. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with brown hair that showed the first threads of gray at the temples and eyes that held a depth of sadness Amelia might have recognized if she had been capable of seeing anything beyond the perceived threat to her daughter. His hands remained in the air, still forming those strange shapes, still moving in patterns that seemed to carry meanings she could not decipher. Behind her, something impossible happened. Laya's hands rose. Her small fingers began to move, mimicking the shapes the man was making, responding in a language that required no voice. Her face had lost its terror. She was looking past her mother at the man in the gray uniform, and she was communicating with him in a way that Amelia had never seen. The lobby fell silent. Every person within sight had stopped moving, their attention captured by the scene unfolding before them. The CEO of Heart Biotech. Her face flushed with rage, standing between a janitor and a child whose hands danced in the air with sudden desperate purpose. Leia's signs were clumsy, but recognizable to anyone who knew the language. Her mother did not know it. She had never thought to learn it. There had been speech therapists and psychologists and doctors of every specialty, but no one had suggested that her daughter might find a voice in the movement of her hands rather than the working of her throat. The man signed something back. His movements were fluid, practiced the work of someone who had spent years perfecting this form of communication. And then Leia's face transformed entirely, the fear, washing away like rain, clearing dust from a window, and she signed 3 words that the man clearly understood. He nodded slowly, his expression softening, with something that looked like compassion, and then he turned his attention to Amelia. His voice was quiet, but carried clearly in the silence of the lobby. Your daughter was having a panic attack. She couldn't find you, and the crowd was overwhelming her. I was only trying to help her calm down. Amelia's rage did not diminish. It redirected, finding new targets, even as her mind struggled to process what she had witnessed. Who are you? How do you know sign language? Why were you approaching my daughter? The man's eyes held hers with a steadiness that seemed out of place given the situation. My name is Ethan Cole. I work here, as you can see. He gestured to his uniform, to the mop still clutched in his hand. I know sign language because I spent 15 years working with children who couldn't speak. And I approached your daughter because she was suffering and I knew how to help her. Security had arrived by now, 4 men in dark suits who positioned themselves around Ethan with the professional alertness of people prepared for violence. Their presence seemed to comfort Amelia slightly, her shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch from their defensive position. I want this man removed from the building. Her voice had recovered its executive authority, the tremor of fear hidden beneath layers of command. Permanently, he had no right to approach my daughter without permission. Ethan did not argue. He did not protest his innocence or demand fair treatment. He simply nodded as if he had expected nothing different and allowed the security team to escort him toward the service exit. But as he walked away, Leia pulled at her mother's sleeve with sudden urgency. Amelia looked down at her daughter and found those dark eyes brimming with fresh tears. Leia's hands moved again, forming signs that her mother could not understand, gestures that seemed to carry desperate importance. The girl was trying to say something, trying to communicate with a ferocity that Amelia had not seen since before the explosion, but the message remained trapped in a language she did not speak. Sweetheart, I don't understand. The words came out gentler now, the rage fading into confusion and concern. I don't know what you're trying to tell me. Leia's face crumpled with frustration. She looked toward the retreating figure of Ethan Cole, her hands still moving, still signing, and then she turned back to her mother with an expression that Amelia would remember for a long time afterward. It was not anger, it was not disappointment, it was something worse. It was resignation. The quiet acceptance of a child who had tried to bridge a gap and found the distance too great to cross. Amelia gathered her daughter into her arms and held her tightly, stroking her hair and murmuring reassurances that felt hollow even as she spoke them. The crowd in the lobby had begun to disperse the drama over the ordinary business of leaving work, resuming as if nothing unusual had occurred. But something had occurred, something that Amelia did not yet understand. And as she carried Leia toward the parking garage, she could not shake the image of her daughter's hands moving in the air, speaking a language that had somehow reached a stranger when it could not reach her own mother. The drive home was silent. Leia sat in the back seat of the company car, her gaze fixed on something beyond the window that Amelia could not see. The driver navigated through the evening traffic with practiced efficiency, taking the route that avoided the worst congestion, but Amelia barely noticed the familiar streets passing by. Her mind was caught in a loop, replaying the scene in the lobby, trying to make sense of what she had witnessed. Their home occupied a stretch of coastline in Pacifica, a modern structure of glass and weathered wood that clung to the cliffs above the Pacific Ocean. David had designed it himself, working with the architects to create a space that felt both expansive and intimate, a place where they could raise their daughter away from the pressures of the city that demanded so much of them both. After his death, Amelia had considered selling it. The memories were everywhere in the kitchen, where he had cooked elaborate Sunday breakfasts, in the study, where he had worked late into the night in the bedroom, where they had whispered plans for a future that would never arrive. But she could not bring herself to leave. This was the last place that still held his presence, and she clung to it the way a drowning person clings to wreckage. She carried Leia inside and set her down in the living room, that vast space with its wall of windows facing the sea. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the water in shades of gold and orange that would have moved her once. Now she saw only the distance, the impossible reach of the ocean, stretching toward a horizon she could never touch. "Are you hungry, sweetheart?" Mrs. Chen left dinner in the refrigerator. "I think it's that pasta you like." Leia shook her head. She had retrieved a piece of paper and a pencil from the art supplies kept in a basket near the couch, and she was writing something with intense concentration. When she finished, she held the paper out to her mother. Amelia took it and read the words written in her daughter's careful hand. "He understands me." 3 words. 3 simple words that carried the weight of 14 months of silence and frustration and desperate attempts at communication. Amelia stared at them until the letters blurred her vision, swimming with tears she refused to let fall. "The man from the lobby?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Leia nodded vigorously. Her hands rose and began forming signs again, the same gestures she had made in the lobby, and this time Amelia watched more carefully. She did not understand what her daughter was saying, but she could see the attention behind each movement, the way Leia's face came alive with expression as she signed. This was not random motion. This was language. A language her daughter had somehow acquired without her knowledge. "Where did you learn to do this? Who taught you?" Leia hesitated, then wrote again. "School teacher, sometimes." Amelia felt a surge of something that might have been anger or might have been shame. Her daughter's school employed a specialist in alternative communication, a woman named Dr. Reyes, who worked with students who struggled with verbal expression. Amelia had approved the program months ago, signing the paperwork that authorized Leia's participation without ever asking what it actually involved. She had assumed it was more of the same, more therapy, more careful coaxing toward the speech that refused to come. She had not considered that they might be teaching her daughter an entirely different way to communicate. "You've been learning sign language." The question came out more sharply than she intended, and she saw Leia flinch slightly at her tone. She moderated her voice, softening it with effort. "I didn't know, sweetheart. No one told me." Leia's pencil moved across the paper and wanted to talk to you, but you don't know the signs. The words hit Amelia like a physical blow. All those months of watching her daughter struggle in silence, and all those nights of sitting by her bed and whispering into the darkness, and she had never thought to meet Leia halfway. She had been waiting for her daughter to find her voice to speak in the way that Amelia understood. And meanwhile, Leia had been building a new voice entirely, one that required hands instead of vocal cords, gestures instead of sounds. "I'm going to learn," Amelia said, and the promise emerged with a fierceness that surprised them both. "I'm going to learn your language, and we're going to talk to each other. Really talk. I promise you that." Leia studied her mother's face with those dark eyes that had seen too much for their years. Then slowly she nodded. Her hand reached out and took Amelia's, squeezing with a strength that seemed impossible in such small fingers. That night, after Leia had fallen asleep, Amelia sat in her home office and began to research. She read about American Sign Language and its variants, about psychogenic mutism, and its treatments, about the ways that trauma could reshape a child's relationship with communication. She found studies on the effectiveness of sign language for children who had lost their speech, testimonies from parents who had watched their silent children come alive through the movement of their hands. And she found, buried in an academic paper from 7 years ago, a reference to a technology called SignLink. The paper described a revolutionary AI system developed by a small startup in the Bay Area. The technology could translate sign language into spoken words in real time, giving voice to people who could not speak through traditional means. The system had been particularly effective for children with trauma-induced mutism, offering them a bridge between the language they had learned and the spoken world they still needed to navigate. The paper praised the innovation, calling it one of the most significant advances in assistive technology in a decade. Amelia searched for SignLink and found a graveyard. The company had shuttered 5 years ago, its assets acquired by a larger corporation called Apex Dynamics. The founder's name appeared in scattered articles, most of them chronicling his fall from grace rather than his initial innovation. Ethan Cole, tech innovator accused of patent fraud. The voice maker who fell from grace. She stared at the name on her screen, her mind struggling to reconcile what she was reading with what she had witnessed in the lobby. The man who had approached her daughter, the janitor in the gray uniform, was Ethan Cole, the inventor of SignLink, the man whose technology had promised to give voice to the voiceless. And he was mopping floors in her building. The questions multiplied faster than she could process them. How had he ended up working as a janitor? What had happened to his company? Why had the articles called him a fraud? And most pressing of all, how had he known exactly the right way to communicate with a traumatized child he had never met? She pulled the employee file from the company database. Ethan Cole hired 8 months ago through a staffing agency that provided janitorial services to Heart Biotech. Background check clean. References verified. No flags. He was a ghost in her system, a name on a roster of people who cleaned the building while the important work happened elsewhere. But she could not leave it there. Something about the encounter in the lobby had cracked open a door she had not known was closed, and now the light streaming through demanded that she look closer. She began searching for everything she could find about Ethan Cole, about SignLink, about the circumstances that had transformed an innovator into invisible labor. The articles painted a picture that grew darker with each one she read. 5 years ago, Ethan Cole had been on the verge of changing the world. His company had developed technology that could revolutionize communication for millions of people with speech disabilities. Investors were circling, major medical device companies were expressing interest. The future seemed bright and certain. Then Apex Dynamics entered the picture. They offered partnership funding, distribution networks that would have accelerated SignLink's reach exponentially. Ethan had signed the papers trusting in the good faith of a corporation that promised to help him achieve his mission. And then through contract clauses and legal maneuvering that the articles described in dry, devastating detail, Apex had taken everything. They claimed ownership of the core technology, locked Ethan out of his own creation, and buried him beneath a legal battle that consumed his savings, his reputation, and ultimately his life as he had known it. The media coverage of the legal battle had been brutal. Apex had mounted a sophisticated public relations campaign that painted Ethan as a fraud, a man who had tried to claim credit for work that belonged to others. The narrative stuck. Former colleagues distanced themselves. Investors withdrew. By the time the courts finally ruled in Apex's favor, Ethan Cole had become synonymous with failure and deception. Amelia found one more article buried deep in a local newspaper archive. The headline made her breath catch in her throat. Wife of disgraced tech founder takes own life. Grace Cole had been a teacher for deaf children, a woman who had believed in her husband's vision and supported him through the development of SignLink. The article described her as beloved by her students, devoted to her family, struggling with the public humiliation that had accompanied her husband's downfall. She had left behind a husband and an 8-year-old son. No note, no explanation, just an empty space where a person had been. Amelia closed her laptop and sat in the darkness of her office, listening to the distant sound of waves breaking against the cliffs below. She thought about Ethan Cole, about the weight he must carry, about the way he had looked at Leia with understanding rather than pity. He had lost everything, his company, his reputation, his wife, and he had found his way to a janitorial uniform in a building owned by a company that was using technology derived from his stolen creation. She had told security to have him removed permanently. She had seen a threat where there had been only kindness. And now, sitting in the dark with the ghost of her husband everywhere around her, she wondered what kind of person she had become. Sleep did not come easily that night. She lay in the bed that still felt too large, without David staring at the ceiling and trying to organize her thoughts into something that made sense. The encounter in the lobby had disrupted the careful order of her world, introducing variables she had not anticipated and emotions she did not know how to process. She was accustomed to problems with clear solutions, challenges that yielded to strategy and effort. This was different. This was human, and humans did not follow predictable patterns. The morning arrived gray and overcast, the sun hidden behind a marine layer that pressed down on the coast like a weight. Amelia moved through her routine with mechanical precision, showering and dressing and reviewing her schedule, while Leia ate breakfast in the kitchen under the watchful eye of the housekeeper. The normalcy felt fragile, a thin veneer over depths she did not want to examine. At the office, she called up the security footage from the previous day. The system was state-of-the-art, capturing high-definition video from multiple angles throughout the building. She found the recordings from the lobby and began to watch. The footage showed what she remembered: the crowd, Leia frozen in place, the tears streaming silently down her face. And then Ethan entered the frame. She watched him approach her daughter, his body language careful and non-threatening, his hands moving in those deliberate signs. She watched Leia respond, the terror melting from her face, her own hands rising to answer. And she watched herself charge into the frame, fury incarnate, throwing herself between them without understanding what she was interrupting. She rewound and watched again and again. Each time she noticed something new. The way Ethan had kept his distance, never actually touching Leia. The patience in his movements, giving her time to process and respond. The moment when Leia had smiled, actually smiled for the first time in months. Amelia had been too consumed with fear to see it in the moment, but the camera had captured it clearly. Her daughter smiling at a stranger who had reached her when no one else could. She pulled up more footage, searching the archives for other appearances of Ethan Cole. She found him in hallways and stairwells, pushing his cleaning cart, mopping floors, emptying trash cans. Invisible labor, the kind that happened in the background, while more important people did more important things. But in each clip, she noticed something else. The way he moved with quiet dignity despite his circumstances. The way he paused sometimes to help someone struggling with a heavy box or a stuck elevator button. The way he seemed to see the people around him even when they did not see him. One clip caught her attention particularly. It showed Ethan in the lobby 3 weeks earlier, near the same spot where he had encountered Leia. A young woman stood nearby, tears streaming down her face, her phone pressed to her ear as she received what was clearly devastating news. Most people walk past without noticing, absorbed in their own concerns. Ethan had stopped. He had waited at a respectful distance until she ended her call, and then he had offered her a tissue from his pocket in a few quiet words that the camera's microphone did not capture. The woman had nodded, wiped her eyes, and continued on her way. Ethan had returned to his mopping as if nothing had happened. Amelia watched that clip 3 times. She was looking at a man who had every reason to be bitter, every justification for rage and resentment, and instead she saw compassion. Consistent, quiet compassion for the suffering of others. She made a decision. She told her assistant to cancel her morning meetings and went down to the Human Resources Department on the 15th floor. The director, a meticulous woman named Sandra Chen, who had been with the company for 12 years, looked surprised to see the CEO in her domain. "Mrs. Hart, what can I do for you?" Amelia closed the door behind her. "I need information about one of our janitorial staff, Ethan Cole. I want to know everything about him, his employment history, his background, where he lives, who else he's worked for. Everything you can find." Sandra's expression became carefully neutral, the professional mask of someone who had learned to accommodate unusual requests without asking questions. "May I ask why you may not?" A pause, then Sandra nodded. "I'll have it on your desk within the hour." The file arrived as promised, a thin folder that contained surprisingly little given the depth of information Amelia had requested. Ethan Cole had been hired through a staffing agency that handled janitorial services for several buildings in the financial district. His background check had been standard, revealing no criminal history, no flags, nothing to suggest he was anything other than a man seeking honest work. He had provided references from previous employers, all of which had been verified. He had shown up on time, completed his duties without complaint, and made no trouble. The file contained his address, a workers' housing complex on the outskirts of the city. It contained his emergency contact information, a cell phone number, and the name of his 8-year-old son, Benjamin Cole. It contained the paperwork he had signed when he was hired, acknowledging the terms of his employment and agreeing to the background check that would reveal nothing of the man he had once been. Amelia stared at the file for a long time. She thought about what the internet had told her about the man who had invented revolutionary technology and lost it all. She thought about what the footage had shown her about the man who still found room for kindness despite having every reason for bitterness. And she thought about what her daughter's face had shown her, that moment of connection with someone who understood. She picked up her phone and called the staffing agency. She asked them to reinstate Ethan Cole immediately with a personal apology for the misunderstanding that had led to his removal. The person on the other end of the line sounded confused but agreed to comply. Heart Biotech was one of their largest clients, and the CEO's requests were not questioned. But reinstating him was not enough. Amelia needed to understand what had happened to him, how his technology had ended up in the hands of Apex Dynamics, and what connection, if any, existed between his fall and the medical devices that Heart Biotech had integrated into its product line 2 years ago. She returned to her office and began digging deeper. The acquisition records were extensive, documented in the meticulous fashion that corporate law required. Heart Biotech had purchased an AI communication system from Apex Dynamics 18 months ago, a technology called VoxBridge that had been integrated into their medical devices for patients with speech disabilities. The system had tested exceptionally well, outperforming competitors in accuracy and ease of use. It had been a significant investment, but the returns had more than justified the cost. She pulled up the technical specifications for VoxBridge and compared them to the descriptions she had found of SignLink in academic papers. The similarities were unmistakable. The core algorithm, the approach to gesture recognition, the neural network architecture, all of it matched what Ethan Cole had developed 5 years ago under a different name. Apex had not created new technology. They had repackaged stolen work and sold it to the highest bidder. And Heart Biotech had been that bidder. Her company was profiting from innovation that had been taken from its creator through legal manipulation and corporate deceit. Amelia sat back in her chair and felt the ground shift beneath her. She had built this company on the promise of ethical innovation of medical technology that would help people rather than exploit them. She had stood on stages and given speeches about corporate responsibility and the moral obligations of those who possess the power to shape industries. And all the while buried in her supply chain, hidden beneath layers of contracts and acquisitions, there was a theft. She needed to know more. She needed to understand exactly how Apex had acquired SignLink and what legal grounds they had claimed for the acquisition. She pulled up the contract files, the documents that detailed the transfer of intellectual property from SignLink Technologies to Apex Dynamics. The original acquisition agreement was thorough, the kind of document that only lawyers could love, filled with clauses and subclauses and references to exhibits that ran to hundreds of pages. Amelia was not a lawyer, but she had enough experience with corporate contracts to navigate the essential terms. Apex had acquired SignLink through what appeared to be a legitimate purchase, paying a sum that the documents claimed represented fair market value for the technology. But as she read deeper, she found discrepancies. The valuation seemed low given what she knew about SignLink's potential. The terms included non-compete clauses that would have prevented Ethan from ever working in his field again. And most troubling of all, the signature at the bottom of the final transfer document was dated 3 days after Grace Cole's death. Amelia knew what grief looked like. She knew how it hollowed a person out, how it made the simplest decisions feel impossible. The idea that Ethan would have signed away his life's work 3 days after losing his wife seemed implausible at best and suspicious at worst. She pulled up the signatures from earlier documents in the file contracts that Ethan had signed before the acquisition during the development of SignLink. She placed them side by side with the signature on the transfer agreement. The signatures were close, but not identical. The earlier ones flowed with confident strokes, the mark of someone comfortable with their own name. The transfer signature was tighter, more hesitant, with slight variations in the letter formations that suggested either extreme stress or forgery. Amelia was not a handwriting expert. She could not say with certainty that the signature was false, but she could see enough to know that something was wrong, that the story told by these documents did not match the story she was piecing together from other sources. She needed help. She needed someone who understood corporate acquisitions and the ways that legal systems could be manipulated to serve powerful interest. She needed to know whether what she suspected was true, and if it was, what could be done about it. She reached for her phone and then stopped. The implications of what she was considering were enormous. If Apex had forged documents to steal Ethan's technology, and if Heart Biotech had unknowingly purchased that stolen technology, then her company was complicit in the destruction of a man's life. The legal exposure alone could be catastrophic. The reputational damage might be worse. But there was another consideration, one that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the image she could not escape. Her daughter's face in the lobby, smiling at a man who understood her. The drawing on her nightstand with that single word, Together, Ethan Cole had given her daughter something that all the therapists and doctors and carefully designed interventions had failed to provide. He had reached across the barrier of silence and found a way to connect. And now Amelia knew that her company was built in part on the wreckage of his life. She could not pretend that the documents in front of her did not exist, that the questions they raised did not demand answers, whatever the cost she had to find the truth. The sun was setting over the bay, painting the sky in shades of red and orange that reminded her of fire. She thought about the explosion that had taken David, about the way that single moment had reshattered everything she understood about safety and control. She had spent 14 months trying to rebuild, to create order out of chaos, to protect what remained of her family. And now she was standing at the edge of another explosion, one of truth and consequences, that could blow apart the careful structures she had constructed. She picked up her phone and called her personal attorney, a woman named Rachel Winters, who had handled her affairs for years and who possessed both discretion and courage in equal measure. Her voice was steady despite the turmoil inside. "Rachel, I need you to look at something. It's sensitive and it needs to stay between us. Can you come to my house tonight?" Rachel agreed without asking questions, which was one of the many reasons Amelia trusted her. The drive home felt longer than usual, the city lights blurring past in a procession of colors that seemed to belong to another world. Amelia picked up Laia from the childcare suite and held her hand in the elevator, feeling the small fingers curl around hers, with a trust that she hoped she deserved. At home, she made dinner for them both, something she rarely did anymore. Laia watched her mother move around the kitchen with an expression of cautious hope, as if she were witnessing something she wanted to believe in, but feared might disappear. They ate together at the big table that David had built from reclaimed wood, the one that had hosted dinner parties and holiday gatherings and quiet family meals. And for the first time in months, the silence between them felt companionable rather than oppressive. After dinner, Amelia sat with Laia on the couch and pulled up a sign language tutorial on her tablet. "Teach me," she said, the words coming out softer than she expected. "Teach me how to talk to you." Laia's face transformed. The wariness melted away, replaced by something that looked like Jade, pure and unguarded, and more beautiful than anything Amelia had seen in a very long time. The girl took her mother's hands and began to shape them, guiding her fingers into the positions that formed words. They worked through the basics together. "Hello," "Goodbye," "I love you," "Thank you." Each sign was a small victory, a bridge built one gesture at a time across the chasm that had separated them. Laia was patient, correcting her mother's mistakes with gentle touches rather than frustration, and Amelia found herself laughing at her own clumsiness, a sound that seemed foreign in the house that had known so much grief. When Rachel arrived at 9 o'clock, Laia was already asleep, tired out by the emotional intensity of their evening together. Amelia led her attorney into the home office and closed the door. She showed Rachel the documents she had gathered, the contracts, the signatures, the evidence of what might be fraud. She explained what she knew about Ethan Cole and SignLink, about Apex Dynamics, and their tactics, about the technology that Heart Biotech had unknowingly built into its products. Rachel listened without interrupting her legal mind, clearly working through the implications of each piece of information. When Amelia finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. Her voice was measured when she finally spoke. "If what you're suggesting is true, if Apex forged documents to steal intellectual property and then sold that stolen property to your company, the legal ramifications are significant for them and potentially for Heart Biotech." Amelia nodded. "I know." Rachel continued, her tone becoming more pointed. "You need to understand what you're risking by pursuing this. If the story becomes public, even if Heart Biotech is ultimately found to be an innocent purchaser, the damage to your reputation and your stock price could be severe. The board will not thank you for opening this door." "I know," Amelia repeated. Rachel studied her for a long moment. "Why are you doing this? You could let it go. The acquisition was legal as far as anyone knows. You're not obligated to investigate further." Amelia thought about how to answer. She thought about Ethan in his gray uniform reaching out to a frightened child with nothing but kindness in his hands. She thought about her daughter's face lighting up at the prospect of teaching her mother a new language. She thought about the weight she carried, the guilt she could not escape, the way grief had transformed her into someone she barely recognized. "Because I've spent 14 months trying to protect my daughter from a world that already took her father." The words came slowly, each one carrying weight. And all that protection didn't reach her. It didn't help her. A janitor in my lobby did more for her in 30 seconds than I've managed in over a year. She paused, gathering herself. If my company is built on the ruins of that man's life, I need to know. And if there's something I can do to make it right, I need to try. Rachel nodded slowly. Then we need to do this carefully. I'll have a forensic document examiner look at the signatures. I'll pull the full acquisition history and look for irregularities. But Amelia, she leaned forward, her expression serious. You should be prepared for what we might find, and for what it might cost to act on it. Amelia met her gaze. I've already lost more than I thought I could survive. Whatever this costs, I can pay it. The investigation began quietly, conducted through back channels and trusted professionals who understood the value of discretion. The forensic document examiner confirmed what Amelia had suspected. The signature on the transfer agreement showed significant variations from Ethan's authenticated signatures, consistent with either extreme psychological distress or deliberate forgery. The legal team uncovered additional irregularities in the acquisition process timeline, discrepancies in missing documentation that suggested the deal had been rushed through while Ethan was in no condition to understand or contest what was happening. While the investigation proceeded, Amelia made a different kind of decision. She sent word through the staffing agency that Ethan Cole should report to her office at the end of his shift on Friday. No explanation was given. The message was simply delivered, a summons that he had no power to refuse if he wanted to keep his job. The days between the summons and the meeting passed slowly. Amelia found herself watching for Ethan in the hallways, catching glimpses of him pushing his cart or wiping down surfaces, always working, always invisible to the people around him. She wondered what he thought about during those long hours of labor, whether he still dreamed of the technology he had created, whether he still believed in the mission that had once driven him. Friday arrived with a clarity of weather that seemed almost ironic, the fog lifting to reveal a sky of brilliant blue that stretched from horizon to horizon. Amelia finished her last meeting of the day and sat alone in her office waiting for the knock that would signal Ethan's arrival. It came at 6:15, the quiet tap that seemed almost hesitant. She called for him to enter. He stood in the doorway of her corner office, still wearing his gray uniform, looking profoundly out of place among the expensive furniture and commanding views. His eyes took in the space with an expression she could not read, perhaps remembering a time when he had occupied rooms like this one, perhaps simply noting the distance between where he was and where he had been. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. Please sit down. He sat, his posture careful, his hands resting on his knees. He looked like a man waiting for judgment, resigned to whatever verdict would be delivered. Amelia studied him for a moment before speaking. I want to apologize for what happened in the lobby. I was frightened and I reacted badly. You were helping my daughter and I should have seen that. Ethan's expression shifted slightly, surprise flickering across his features before he schooled them back to neutrality. You were protecting your child, I understand. You're very generous considering I had you removed from the building. Amelia paused, choosing her next words carefully. I've been doing some research, Mr. Cole, about you, about your work, about what happened to your company. Something changed in his eyes, a wariness that had not been there before. Research. I know about SignLink. I know about Apex Dynamics. I know what they did to you. The wariness deepened into something darker, something that looked like pain, long buried but never forgotten. Then you know more than most people do. Amelia reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a folder, placing it on the surface between them. I also know that my company purchased technology from Apex 2 years ago. Technology that was derived from your work. Technology that they had no right to sell because they had no right to it in the first place. Ethan did not reach for the folder. He sat very still. His breathing controlled his face, a mask that revealed nothing of the storm that must have been raging beneath it. Why are you telling me this? His voice remained quiet, but there was an edge to it now. The sharp point of something that might have been anger or might have been grief. Because I believe in knowing the truth. Because my daughter smiled at you when she hasn't smiled in months. And because Amelia hesitated, feeling the weight of what she was about to say, I think I might be able to help. Ethan's laugh was short and bitter, a sound that seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised her. Help! Do you have any idea how many people have said that word to me over the past 5 years? Lawyers who wanted to help by taking the last of my money. Journalists who wanted to help by telling my side of the story for their own ratings. Even my friends wanted to help until helping me became too inconvenient and they disappeared. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I appreciate your apology, Mrs. Hart, and I'm glad I could help your daughter. But I don't need your help. I don't need anyone's help. I've learned how to live without it. Amelia remained seated, letting his anger wash over her without reaction. She understood it. She recognized it. It was the same anger that had burned inside her after David's death, the fury at a universe that could take so much and offer so little in return. Then help me understand something. She kept her voice calm, measured. You could have told me who you were that day in the lobby. You could have used the moment to make a scene, to draw attention to what was done to you. Why didn't you? Ethan turned to face her, and she saw the full weight of his exhaustion, the years of struggle etched into lines around his eyes. Because your daughter was afraid and she needed help. That was all that mattered in that moment. Amelia nodded slowly. That's why I called you here. Not because of what I learned about your past, but because of what I saw in that lobby. You put a frightened child before everything else, before your own pain, before any opportunity for yourself. A lot of people wouldn't have done that. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city that had given her so much and taken so much more. My husband died in this building 14 months ago. A lab explosion that everyone said was unavoidable. Just an accident, just bad luck. But I don't believe in accidents anymore. I believe that things happen because of choices, because of systems, because of the decisions that people in power make every single day. She turned back to face him. What happened to you wasn't an accident either. It was a choice made by people who decided that your life's work was theirs to take. And my company benefited from that choice without knowing it. I can't undo that, but I can refuse to let it continue. Ethan studied her for a long moment, his expression impossible to read. What exactly are you proposing? Amelia walked back to her desk and pulled out a second folder thicker than the first. My legal team has been investigating the acquisition of SignLink by Apex Dynamics. We've found evidence of fraud, forged signatures, coerced agreements, enough to potentially reopen the case if we can find the right legal strategy. She held out the folder to him. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm not asking you to believe that I have your best interests at heart. I'm asking you to look at what we've found and decide for yourself whether it's worth pursuing. Ethan did not take the folder immediately. His hands remained at his sides, clenched into fists that spoke of tension held too long. But his eyes moved to the folder and she saw something flicker in them, a spark of something that might have been hope or might have been fear. Why would you risk this? He asked finally. You said it yourself, your company benefited from the acquisition. If you expose the fraud, you expose Hart Biotech's involvement. The board won't let you do that. The shareholders won't let you do that. The board doesn't know yet. Neither do the shareholders. Amelia's voice was steady. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. And because my daughter taught me something important with a piece of paper and a single word. Ethan's brow furrowed. What word? Together. Amelia felt the crack in her chest widen the wall she had built beginning to crumble. She drew a picture of us, holding hands, reaching for each other across a distance. That's what she needs more than anything right now, connection. Someone who understands her silence and respects it. You gave her that in 30 seconds. She stepped closer, holding the folder out again. I spent 14 months trying to fix her to bring back the daughter I had before the trauma, and all I did was push her further away. You showed me that she doesn't need to be fixed. She needs to be heard. I owe you for that, and I pay my debts. Ethan's resistance wavered. She could see it in the softening of his shoulders, the unclenching of his fists. He reached out and took the folder, holding it as if it might burn him. I need to think about this. His voice was barely above a whisper. I need to understand what you're asking and what it might cost. Amelia nodded. Take all the time you need. But Ethan, she waited until his eyes met hers. You've been invisible for 5 years. You've watched other people profit from your work while you clean their floors. You've carried the weight of what they did to you without complaint, without bitterness, that anyone could see. But I see you now, and I won't look away. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that neither of them could fully grasp. Ethan clutched the folder to his chest like a lifeline, and for a moment Amelia thought she saw moisture gathering in his eyes before he blinked it away. He left without saying goodbye, walking out of her office with the folder pressed against him and his head bowed. Amelia watched him go, feeling the strange mixture of hope and terror that accompanies every leap into unknown territory. She had started something that could not be stopped. The truth was out, at least between them, and truth had a way of growing, of spreading, of demanding to be heard. Whatever came next, she knew that nothing would be the same. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of investigation and discretion. Amelia's legal team continued to build their case, gathering evidence and expert testimony that supported the theory of fraud. Rachel Winters proved invaluable, her connections in the legal world opening doors that would have remained closed to less experienced hands. The picture that emerged was damning. Apex Dynamics had systematically targeted SignLink during its most vulnerable moment. They had waited until Ethan was drowning in grief, until his wife's death had shattered his ability to function, and then they had moved with the precision of predators sensing weakness. The contracts they had presented were designed to confuse their language, deliberately opaque their terms, buried beneath layers of legal jargon that would have required a clear mind to parse. Ethan had signed without fully understanding, trusting in the good faith of people who had none. The forged signature on the final transfer document was the capstone of their deception. When the forensic examiner presented his findings, even Rachel, who had seen her share of corporate malfeasance, seemed shaken by the audacity of it. They waited until he was destroyed, Rachel said during one of their evening meetings at Amelia's home. They knew he wouldn't fight back. They knew no one would believe him if he tried. Amelia nodded grimly. And they were right. He didn't fight back. He gave up. Can you blame him? Rachel's voice held an unusual note of sympathy. His wife was dead, his company was gone, his reputation was ruined. Fighting would have meant reliving all of it publicly with no guarantee of winning. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is stop. Amelia thought about that for a long time after Rachel left. She thought about the choices people made when they were broken, the survival instincts that kicked in when everything else failed. Ethan had chosen to disappear, to become invisible, to protect what remained of himself and his son from further damage. It was not cowardice. It was something closer to wisdom, the recognition that some battles cannot be won, and the decision to preserve what can be saved. But circumstances had changed. Amelia had resources that Ethan had never possessed, connections and capital, and a platform that could amplify any message she chose to send. If she took up this cause, she could fight the battle he had been unable to fight. She could restore what had been stolen, or at least try. The question was whether he would let her. Ethan had not contacted her since their meeting in her office. The folder she had given him contained everything her team had found, along with her personal cell phone number and an open invitation to reach out whenever he was ready. Days passed with no word. Then weeks. Amelia began to wonder if she had misjudged the situation, if Ethan had decided that the risks outweighed any potential benefit. Then on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after their meeting, her phone rang. His voice was tired but clear. I read everything in the folder. Twice. Amelia sat down slowly, her heart beating faster than she expected. And by then, a long pause. I always knew what they did to me. I just never thought I could prove it. You can now. We can. Another pause, longer this time. Why should I trust you? You're a CEO. You run a company that profited from my work. What's in this for you? It was a fair question, the question she had been asking herself for weeks. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. I know it's the right thing to do, but that's not the whole answer. She took a breath, searching for words that would capture the truth. My daughter looked at you like you were the first person who understood her in over a year. She's 6 years old and she carries a weight that no child should have to carry. When I saw the way you helped her and realized that I'd been so focused on protecting her from the world that I forgot to help her live in it. Her voice dropped lower. You gave her something I couldn't give her. And when I found out that my company was built in part on your stolen work, it felt like the universe was telling me something. Like there was a debt I needed to pay, even if I hadn't known I owed it. Ethan was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its wariness. My son is 8 years old. His name is Ben. He's the only reason I get up every morning. When his mother died, he lost everything, his home, his school, his friends. We moved 3 times in 2 years because I couldn't hold down at one because the lawsuits drained every penny because no one would hire a man who had been labeled a fraud. He paused, and Amelia could hear the weight of years in his breathing. Ben learned sign language from his mother. She taught it to him when he was barely old enough to form the gestures. He still practices every day even though she's gone. I think it's his way of staying connected to her. Amelia's throat tightened. That's why you knew how to reach Laya. That's why. I've spent years watching children communicate without words. I know what it looks like when someone is trapped in their own silence. Your daughter was drowning and she didn't know how to call for help in a way that anyone could hear. The conversation stretched on, moving from the practical to the personal and back again. They talked about their children, about the ways that loss had reshaped their lives, about the small moments of grace that made the darkness bearable. Amelia found herself sharing things she had not spoken aloud since David's death, memories and fears and hopes that had lived only in her own mind. When the call finally ended, she sat in her darkened living room and listened to the waves breaking against the cliffs below. Something had shifted between them. Some barrier had been crossed. They were no longer CEO and janitor, no longer investigator and subject. They were two people who had lost nearly everything and were trying to figure out what it might mean to rebuild. The next morning, Amelia called an emergency meeting with her legal team. It was time to move forward. The case against Apex Dynamics would require careful preparation. They needed to establish that Heart Biotech had been an innocent purchaser, that Amelia had acted swiftly and responsibly upon discovering the fraud, and that the company was committed to making things right. The legal strategy would be complex, involving multiple jurisdictions and regulatory bodies, but Rachel believed they had a strong foundation. More challenging was the question of how to present the story to the public. Corporate fraud was news, but the human element would determine whether people cared. Ethan's story had all the ingredients for public sympathy: a brilliant inventor betrayed by powerful interests, a grieving widower reduced to manual labor, a man who had lost everything except his dignity. But Ethan himself would need to be willing to tell that story to become visible again after years of cultivating invisibility. Amelia arranged a second meeting, this time at a neutral location away from Heart Biotech's gleaming towers. They met at a coffee shop in Oakland, a quiet place with mismatched furniture and art on the walls that looked like it had been painted by the owner's children. Ethan arrived first, nursing a cup of black coffee, looking slightly more rested than he had in her office, but still carrying the weight of years on his shoulders. She ordered tea and sat across from him, placing a new folder on the table between them. Her approach was direct. We're ready to move forward with the legal case. Rachel thinks we can have filings prepared within a month. But before we do anything, I need to know if you're willing to be part of this. Ethan looked at the folder without touching it. Part of what exactly? The case will be stronger if you're willing to tell your story publicly, not just in legal documents, but in the press. People need to understand what was done to you and why it matters. She saw the resistance in his eyes before he spoke. I spent 5 years trying to disappear. I watched my name dragged through the mud by people who knew they were lying. The thought of going through that again, of putting Ben through it again, is not something I can agree to lightly. I understand. Amelia kept her voice calm. And I'm not asking you to make a decision right now, but I want you to consider something. She leaned forward slightly. Right now, the story that exists is the one Apex created. You're the fraud, the failed inventor who tried to steal his own work. That story has followed you for 5 years. It's why you can't get a job in your field. It's why people who don't know you assume the worst about you. Her voice softened. If you stay silent, that story wins. But if you speak up, if you let people see who you really are and what was really done to you, we have a chance to replace that story with the truth. Ethan's hands wrapped around his coffee cup, his knuckles whitening with the force of his grip. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. No, Amelia agreed, it's not. It's terrifying and exhausting, and there are no guarantees. But I've seen what you can do when you decide something matters. I saw it in that lobby with my daughter. You have more strength than you give yourself credit for. They sat in silence for several minutes, the sounds of the coffee shop filling the space around them. Finally, Ethan looked up and met her eyes. I need to talk to Ben. He's old enough to understand what this would mean for us. If he's not okay with it, if he doesn't want to go through this, then my answer is no. Amelia nodded. That's fair. Take whatever time you need. Ethan finished his coffee and stood. But before he left, he paused and looked back at her. You know, when I walked into your office, the first time I expected you to threaten me, to tell me to stay away from your daughter or face consequences. I was ready for that. It's what I've learned to expect from people in your position. Amelia waited, sensing that he needed to finish the thought. Instead, you apologized. You offered to help. You treated me like a person. His voice roughened with emotion he was struggling to contain. I'd forgotten what that felt like. He left before she could respond, walking out into the gray Oakland afternoon with his shoulders slightly straighter than when he had arrived. 3 days later, her phone rang again. Ethan's voice was different this time, clearer and more determined. I talked to Ben. I told him everything about SignLink, about what happened with his mother, about what you're proposing. I thought he would be scared. I thought he would want to protect himself from more pain. He paused, and Amelia heard him take a shaky breath. Do you know what he said? He said that his mother would want people to know the truth. He said that she always believed in my work and that giving up would mean letting the bad guys win. Amelia felt tears prick at her eyes. He sounds like an extraordinary kid. He is, pride mixed with grief in Ethan's voice. He's the best thing I've ever done. And if he thinks we should fight, then we fight. The machinery of justice began to move. Rachel filed the initial legal motions alleging fraud in the acquisition of SignLink and seeking to void the original transfer agreement. The filing sent shockwaves through the corporate world, with analysts scrambling to assess the implications for Apex Dynamics and Heart Biotech alike. Stock prices fluctuated wildly as investors tried to predict the outcome. Amelia's board demanded answers. She gave them the truth laid out in the stark terms she had prepared for weeks. Heart Biotech had unknowingly purchased stolen technology. The CEO had discovered the theft and chosen to act rather than bury the evidence. The company would cooperate fully with legal proceedings and take whatever steps were necessary to distance itself from the fraud. The board's reaction was mixed. Some members applauded her integrity. Others questioned her judgment, arguing that she should have found a way to address the issue quietly rather than exposing the company to public scrutiny. One board member, a silver-haired man named Thompson, who had opposed her appointment from the beginning, suggested that her emotional attachment to the janitor had compromised her objectivity. Amelia listened to their concerns and then responded with the calm authority that had carried her to the top of her industry. We can disagree about strategy, but we cannot disagree about ethics. Heart Biotech was founded on the principle that innovation should serve humanity. If we build our success on the suffering of others, we betray that principle and everything our company stands for. She looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. I will not lead a company that profits from theft. If that position is untenable for this board, then I am prepared to resign. But I will not change my course. The room fell silent. After a long moment, the chair of the board, a woman named Sandra Chen, who had mentored Amelia through her early career, spoke up. We may not all agree with how this was handled, but we elected Amelia to lead this company because of her integrity, not in spite of it. I move that we support her actions and proceed as she has outlined. The vote was close but decisive. The board backed Amelia's decision, though several members made their displeasure clear through abstentions and pointed questions. She left the meeting knowing that she had won the battle, but that the war was far from over. Meanwhile, Amelia had arranged something else, something that existed outside the world of legal filings and board meetings. She had asked Ethan to come to her home on Saturday afternoon to meet Leia properly, in an environment where the chaos of the lobby could not intrude. The morning of his visit, she found herself nervous in a way that surprised her. She changed her outfit 3 times before settling on jeans and a simple blouse, casual enough to suggest ease, but careful enough to show respect. Leia had been preparing all week, practicing new signs she wanted to show Ethan, drawing pictures that she planned to give him as gifts. He arrived at 2 o'clock, precisely pulling up in a 10-year-old Honda that had clearly seen better days but was meticulously clean. He stepped out wearing khakis and a button-down shirt, his hair freshly cut, his face clean-shaven. With him was a boy of about 8 with dark hair and serious eyes, that took in the coastal mansion with an expression of wonder. Amelia met them at the door. "You must be Ben." The boy nodded, suddenly shy. "Yes, ma'am. I've heard a lot about you. Leia's been looking forward to meeting you." At the mention of Leia's name, Ben's shyness seemed to evaporate. "Is she the one who can't talk? Dad said she uses sign language like I do." Amelia felt her heart squeeze at the simple understanding in his voice. "That's right. She's in the living room. Would you like to meet her?" Ben looked up at his father for permission. Ethan nodded and the boy followed Amelia into the house with quick, eager steps. Leia was sitting on the couch clutching a stuffed elephant that David had given her on her 4th birthday. When she saw Ben, her eyes went wide and for a moment neither child moved. Then Ben raised his hands and signed a greeting. Leia's face transformed. She set down the elephant and signed back her movements more confident than Amelia had ever seen them. The two children fell into conversation, their hands dancing through the air in a language that needed no voice, and within minutes they were sitting side by side on the floor, pulling out art supplies and beginning to draw together. Amelia and Ethan stood in the doorway watching their children connect across the barriers that had isolated each of them. Ethan spoke softly so the children would not overhear. "She's beautiful. She has your eyes." And her father's stubbornness. Amelia smiled despite the ache that accompanied any mention of David. "She's been practicing all week. I think she was more nervous than I was." They moved to the kitchen where Amelia had prepared coffee and sandwiches. Through the window, they could see the Pacific stretching toward the horizon, gray and vast and indifferent to the small human dramas playing out on its shores. Ethan wrapped his hands around his coffee mug. "This house is incredible. Did you design it?" "David did. He had very specific ideas about how we should live, about creating space for family." Amelia paused, feeling the familiar weight of grief settle over her. He would have loved seeing Leia today. She hasn't been this animated since before the accident. "Tell me about him." Ethan's voice was gentle, an invitation rather than a demand. "If you want to." Amelia found that she did want to. She told him about David's passion for pure research, his ability to find wonder in the smallest details of molecular biology, his terrible jokes that somehow always made her laugh. She told him about their first date, a disaster that involved a flat tire and a thunderstorm, and ended with them soaking wet and laughing so hard they could barely breathe. She told him about the night Leia was born, how David had cried harder than the baby, how he had promised to protect them both from every danger the world could offer. And then she told him about the explosion, the phone call that had shattered everything, the drive to the hospital where they told her that David was gone before she could say goodbye. She told him about the funeral, about the way Leia had sat through the service in absolute silence, about the moment she realized her daughter had lost her voice along with her father. When she finished, she found that tears were streaming down her face and she had no memory of when they had started. Ethan handed her a napkin and waited while she composed herself. His voice was rough when he finally spoke. "Grace's death was my fault." Amelia looked up sharply. "How can you say that? Because it's true." His jaw clenched with the effort of holding himself together. The lawsuit, the public humiliation, watching everything we'd built collapse around us. She couldn't take it. She tried to be strong for me, for Ben, but it was too much. He stared out the window at the uncaring sea. She left a note. It said she was tired of fighting a battle we couldn't win. She said she hoped I could forgive her someday, that she hoped Ben would understand when he was older. The words hung in the air, heavy with pain that time had not diminished. I found her in the morning. Ben was already awake. He had made her breakfast in bed the way he did every Sunday. He was waiting in the kitchen with a tray of toast and orange juice when I came downstairs. Ethan's voice broke. I had to tell him his mother was gone while he held that tray in his hands. Amelia reached across the table and took his hand. The gesture surprised them both, but neither pulled away. "It wasn't your fault," she said firmly. "What Apex did to you, to your family, that was criminal. Grace's death is on them, not on you. I tell myself that." Ethan's eyes were wet, but his voice steadied. Some days I even believe it. They sat together in the kitchen, hands linked across the table while the children's laughter drifted in from the living room. It was the sound of something healing, of connections being forged in the space where loss had carved its deepest wounds. When it was time for Ethan and Ben to leave, Leia did something unexpected. She walked up to Ethan and wrapped her arms around his waist, hugging him with all the strength her small body possessed. Then she stepped back and signed something that Amelia did not quite understand. Ethan's face softened. He knelt down to her level and signed back his movements slow and clear. Leah nodded, her expression solemn but hopeful. She turned to her mother and wrote on the small notepad she always carried, "He promised to teach me more." Amelia looked at Ethan, who shrugged with a hint of the first genuine smile she had seen from him. She asked if I would help her get better at signing. I said I'd be honored. Standing in the doorway of her home, watching Ethan's old Honda disappear down the coastal road, Amelia felt something shift in her chest. It was not quite hope, not yet, but it was the space where hope might grow, a clearing in the forest of her grief, where light could finally reach the ground. The legal battle was coming. The press coverage would be relentless. There would be setbacks and betrayals and moments when she would question every decision she had made. But for now, in this moment, she had something she had not possessed in 14 months. She had the beginning of something new. Word count, 9,256 words. Continuing, part 1. The preparations for the legal case consumed Amelia's days, but her evenings belonged to something different. Twice a week, Ethan came to the house to teach Leah sign language, and these sessions became the highlight of the girls' week. Ben accompanied his father on every visit, and the two children developed a friendship that transcended the barriers of spoken language. Amelia watched from the sidelines, at first content to see her daughter blossom under Ethan's patient instruction. But gradually she found herself drawn into the lessons, sitting beside Leah and forming the signs alongside her. Her progress was slower than her daughter's, her adult brain less flexible than Leah's young mind, but she persisted with a determination that surprised everyone, including herself. The first time she successfully signed a complete sentence to Leah without help, the look on her daughter's face made every moment of frustration worthwhile. The girl's eyes went wide, her mouth forming an O of surprise, and then she launched herself at her mother with such force that they both tumbled backward onto the couch. Ethan watched from across the room, and when Amelia caught his eye, she saw something there that made her heart skip a beat. It was not quite joy, not quite peace, but something in between, something that looked like the beginning of healing. The media storm broke 3 weeks before the case was scheduled to reach the courts. Someone had leaked details of the lawsuit to a business journalist with connections at Apex Dynamics, and the story that emerged was not the one Amelia had hoped to tell. Heart Biotech CEO attacks former partner in personal vendetta. The headline blazed across financial news sites and technology blogs, accompanied by photographs of Amelia that made her look cold and calculating. The article portrayed her as a ruthless executive who had manufactured evidence against a respected company in order to eliminate a competitor. It mentioned Ethan only briefly, characterizing him as a disgraced inventor who had already lost one legal battle and was now seeking revenge through a wealthy ally. Amelia read the article in her office, feeling the familiar cold rage that had become her constant companion since David's death. They were twisting the truth, turning her into the villain of a story in which she had tried only to do what was right. The injustice of it burned in her chest like acid. Her phone rang. It was Rachel. "We have a problem." The attorney's voice was tense. "3 of our expert witnesses just backed out. They're claiming scheduling conflicts, but I'm hearing through back channels that Apex got to them." Amelia closed her eyes. "Can we replace them?" "We can try, but this is going to delay the proceedings by at least a month, maybe more." The delays stretched into weeks, then into months. Apex Dynamics threw every resource at their disposal into defeating the case, hiring armies of lawyers and public relations experts who worked around the clock to control the narrative. They filed countersuits alleging defamation. They demanded sanctions against Rachel for pursuing what they called a frivolous claim. They planted stories in friendly media outlets that painted Ethan as an unstable man obsessed with destroying the company that had legitimately acquired his technology. Through it all, Amelia held firm. She appeared on financial news programs to present her side of the story, speaking with the calm authority that had made her reputation in the biotech industry. She opened Heart Biotech's books to independent auditors who confirmed that the company had purchased the technology in good faith. She funded private investigators who uncovered additional evidence of Apex's fraudulent practices, evidence that would eventually prove crucial. But the toll was heavy. Her board grew increasingly restless, with several members demanding that she settle the case and move on. Stock prices continued their volatile swings as investors lost confidence in the company's leadership. And worst of all, the pressure began to affect her relationship with Laya, the long hours and constant stress leaving her with less energy for the moments that mattered most. One evening after a particularly brutal day of depositions, Amelia came home to find Leia sitting alone in the dark living room. The girl had clearly been crying, her face streaked with dried tears, her hands clutching the stuffed elephant that had become her constant companion. Amelia dropped her briefcase and rushed to her daughter's side. "Sweetheart, what's wrong? What happened?" Leia did not respond at first. She sat motionless, staring at something Amelia could not see. Then slowly her hands rose and formed a sign that Amelia had learned early in their lessons together. Scared. Scared of what, baby? Tell me. Leia's hands moved again more quickly this time, the signs tumbling over each other in her urgency to communicate. Amelia struggled to follow, catching some words and missing others, but the meaning was clear enough. She was scared that the bad people on television were going to hurt her mother. She was scared that the fighting would never stop. She was scared that she would lose Amelia the way she had lost her father. Amelia pulled her daughter close and held her, feeling the small body tremble with fears too large for any child to carry alone. She thought about what she had told herself for months, that she was fighting for justice, for truth, for the principle that good people should not be destroyed by corporate greed. All of it was true, but none of it mattered as much as the child in her arms. She made a decision in that moment, one that would shape everything that followed. The next morning, Amelia called Ethan and asked him to meet her at the coffee shop in Oakland. He arrived looking tired, the stress of the legal battle etched into lines around his eyes. He had been deposed multiple times, forced to relive the worst moments of his life in front of lawyers who twisted his words and questioned his motives. The process was grinding him down, and Amelia could see it. Her voice was gentle but direct. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Ethan nodded, his expression wary. "If we settle this case, if we accept some kind of compromise with Apex, what would that mean to you?" The question hung in the air between them. Ethan's hands wrapped around his coffee cup, his knuckles white with tension. "A settlement would mean they win," he said finally. "They get to keep the technology they stole. They get to keep calling me a fraud. Nothing changes. But you would be free of this." Amelia leaned forward. "No more depositions, no more press coverage, no more strangers dissecting your life for their entertainment. You could move on." Ethan's laugh was bitter. "Move on to what? Mopping more floors, watching Ben grow up, wondering why his father gave up." He shook his head. "I spent 5 years trying to move on. All it got me was invisible." Amelia sat back, studying him carefully. "So you want to keep fighting?" "What I want doesn't matter." Ethan's voice hardened. "What matters is whether we can win. Because if we can't, if this whole thing ends with Apex triumphant and Heart Biotech damaged and both of us destroyed, then what was the point?" It was a fair question, and Amelia had been asking herself the same thing for weeks. The case was strong, but legal battles were unpredictable. Apex had resources that seemed limitless and a willingness to fight dirty that bordered on pathological. Victory was possible, but far from certain. "I think we can win," she said slowly. "Rachel thinks so too. The evidence of fraud is overwhelming once you get past the legal smokescreens they've thrown up." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "But I also know what this is costing. My daughter cried herself to sleep last night because she's afraid of losing me. I've spent the last 6 months fighting so hard that I almost forgot why I started." Ethan's expression softened. "Leia's okay. She will be, but I need to be present for her in a way I haven't been." She reached across the table and took his hand, an echo of the gesture she had made weeks ago in her kitchen. "I'm not giving up. I'm not backing down. But I need to find a way to fight this battle without losing my family in the process." Ethan turned her hand over in his, looking at her palm as if it contained answers to questions he had not yet asked. "What are you proposing?" "I want to accelerate the timeline, force a resolution one way or another. My legal team has been building toward a comprehensive case that would take years to fully develop. But Rachel says there's enough evidence right now to file for an emergency injunction that would freeze Apex's use of SignLink while the larger case proceeds." Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes. That would force them to negotiate. Or fight even harder, but at least we'd know where we stand. Ethan was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Let's do it." The emergency injunction sent shockwaves through the corporate world. Rachel filed the motion on a Friday afternoon, timing it to maximize media coverage over the weekend. By Monday morning, the story had exploded across business and technology news, with analysts speculating about the implications for both companies and the broader industry. Heart Biotech escalates fraud allegations against Apex Dynamics. SignLink inventor seeks emergency relief in patent dispute. CEO Hart stakes reputation on claims of corporate theft. The coverage was intense but no longer one-sided. The evidence Rachel had compiled was too compelling to ignore, and journalists who had initially accepted Apex's version of events began to ask harder questions. Former employees of both SignLink and Apex came forward with corroborating stories. Academic experts weighed in on the technological similarities between SignLink and Voxbridge. The narrative was shifting. Apex responded with their own escalation. They filed a countersuit against Amelia, personally alleging that she had conducted an illegal investigation into their business practices. They demanded that she be removed as CEO of Heart Biotech, pending the resolution of all legal matters. They even suggested that her emotional state, grief-stricken widow, devoted mother had compromised her judgment. The attacks stung, but Amelia had prepared for them. She released a statement acknowledging that she had initiated an internal investigation after discovering potential irregularities, as was her responsibility as CEO. She noted that all investigative activities had been conducted through proper legal channels and with the guidance of counsel. And she concluded with words that would be quoted widely in the days that followed. "I will not be intimidated by those who believe that wealth and power entitle them to destroy innocent lives. I will not stand by while a good man is erased from his own story, and I will not teach my daughter that justice is something we abandon when it becomes inconvenient. Some things are worth fighting for. This is one of them." The court hearing on the emergency injunction was scheduled for a Thursday morning in late autumn. Amelia dressed carefully that day, choosing a suit that was professional but not severe, wanting to project confidence without appearing aggressive. She met Rachel at the courthouse an hour before proceedings were scheduled to begin. "Are we ready?" Amelia asked. Rachel's expression was focused, the mask of a professional about to do battle. "As ready as we can be. The judge is known for being thorough and impartial. She'll want to see evidence, not theater." The courtroom was packed with reporters, legal observers, and representatives from both companies. Ethan sat in the gallery wearing a suit that Amelia had purchased for him when he admitted he did not own anything appropriate for court. His face was pale but determined, his eyes fixed on the proceedings with the intensity of someone who had waited 5 years for this moment. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Rachel presented the evidence of fraud, walking the judge through the forged signature, the timeline of the acquisition, the testimony of experts who had analyzed the technology. Apex attorneys pushed back at every turn, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial, that the signature variations could be explained by stress rather than forgery, that Ethan Cole had a history of making baseless claims against companies he blamed for his failures. Amelia watched the judge's face throughout, trying to read her reactions. Judge Eleanor Vasquez was a small woman with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She asked probing questions of both sides, her tone neutral, but her intelligence evident in every query. By the time the final arguments concluded, Amelia had no idea which way she would rule. The judge announced that she would issue her decision within 72 hours. The waiting that followed was among the hardest periods of Amelia's life. She spent the first evening at home with Leia, the two of them cooking dinner together and practicing sign language and watching a movie that neither of them really followed. When Leia fell asleep on the couch, her head in her mother's lap, Amelia sat motionless for a long time, stroking her daughter's hair and trying not to think about what the future might hold. The second day brought phone calls from board members demanding updates and reporters seeking comments. Amelia handled each with the same calm professionalism, revealing nothing about her internal state. She worked through the day's regular business, signing off on quarterly reports and reviewing research proposals, but her mind was elsewhere. That evening, Ethan called. "I couldn't sleep last night. I keep replaying every moment of the hearing in my head, wondering if there was something I should have said differently." Amelia understood the feeling. "You did everything right. The rest is out of our hands." A pause. "Then I want to thank you, whatever happens tomorrow." "Don't thank me yet. I'm thanking you regardless." His voice was thick with emotion. "No one has ever fought for me the way you have. No one has ever believed in me this much. Even if we lose, that means something." Amelia felt tears prick at her eyes. We're not going to lose. You don't know that. No, she admitted, but I believe it. And sometimes belief is all we have. The third day arrived, gray and wet rain falling steadily from clouds that seemed to press down on the city like a weight. Amelia received the news at 11:47 in the morning, a text from Rachel containing only 2 words, "We won." She read the message 3 times before the meaning registered. Then she sat down in her chair and let the tears fall. Judge Vasquez's ruling was comprehensive and damning. She found substantial evidence that the signature on the transfer agreement was fraudulent. She noted the suspicious timing of the acquisition occurring when Ethan Cole was psychologically incapable of meaningful consent. She observed that Apex Dynamics had engaged in a pattern of behavior designed to silence legitimate questions about the origins of their technology. The emergency injunction was granted. Apex was prohibited from using licensing or selling any technology derived from SignLink pending full adjudication of the underlying dispute. The judge strongly encouraged both parties to pursue mediation rather than prolong litigation, noting that the evidence she had seen raised serious questions about Apex's conduct that might warrant investigation by regulatory authorities. The news spread quickly. By afternoon, financial analysts were predicting that Apex would be forced to settle rather than risk a full trial that could expose additional wrongdoing. Heart Biotech's stock price surged as investors recognized that the company had positioned itself on the right side of a major industry controversy, and Ethan Cole's name began appearing in headlines with a very different tone than it had carried for 5 years. SignLink inventor vindicated in court ruling, judge finds evidence of fraud in landmark tech acquisition case. The man who lost everything known may finally get justice. Amelia read the headlines from her office, feeling a strange mixture of triumph and exhaustion. She had been so focused on winning that she had given little thought to what victory would actually mean. Now faced with the reality of it, she found herself uncertain about how to proceed. Her phone buzzed, a text from Ethan. "Can I see you?" she typed back. "Come to my office." He arrived 20 minutes later, still wearing the suit from the courthouse, looking stunned in a way that made her want to wrap her arms around him. She resisted the impulse, maintaining professional distance as he took a seat across from her desk. "I don't know what to say." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I've imagined this moment for 5 years. I thought I knew how it would feel, but I don't feel anything except confused." Amelia nodded. "The adrenaline will wear off eventually. The reality will sink in. What happens now?" Rachel expects Apex to reach out about settlement within the week. They don't want a full trial any more than we do. There'll be negotiations, probably some kind of structured arrangement that returns at least partial ownership of the technology to you. Ethan shook his head slowly. "I don't want the technology back. I don't want to run a company or manage a product or deal with any of that." Amelia tilted her head, surprised. "Then what do you want?" He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes drifting to the window in the gray city beyond. "When I started SignLink, I wanted to help children who couldn't speak find a way to communicate. That was the whole point. Not money, not fame, just helping kids who were trapped in silence." He turned back to face her. "I want to do that work again. Not as a CEO, not as an entrepreneur, just as someone who helps. I've been watching you with Leia, watching the way you've learned to reach her. That's what matters. That's all that's ever mattered." Amelia felt something shift inside her, a recognition of shared purpose that transcended the circumstances that had brought them together. What if there was a way to do both, to honor what you created and use it to help children at the same time? Ethan's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" The idea took shape as she spoke, the outline of something that felt right in a way that business decisions rarely did. What if we created a foundation? Something that uses the technology and the settlement funds to provide resources for children with speech disabilities. You could run the program, work directly with the kids and families, while others handle the administrative side. She leaned forward, warming to the concept. We could call it something meaningful, not SignLink, not Heart Biotech, something that represents what this is really about. Ethan stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly a smile spread across his face, the first genuine, unguarded smile she had ever seen from him. "Hope," he said softly. "It should be about hope." Amelia smiled back. "Hope speaks. Hope speaks." He tested the words, nodding slowly. "I like it." They sat together in her office as the afternoon faded into evening, sketching out the framework for something new. The legal battles would continue for months. The negotiations would be complex and contentious, and there would be setbacks and frustrations along the way. But for the first time since David's death, Amelia felt like she was building something rather than simply defending against loss. The rain stopped as the sun began to set, and golden light poured through the clouds to illuminate the city below. Amelia watched it spread across the towers and streets, touching everything with warmth that had seemed impossible just hours before. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked. She considered the question carefully before answering. "I'm thinking that my daughter smiled at you in a lobby and everything changed. I'm thinking that the worst things that happened to both of us led us to this moment. I'm thinking that maybe the universe isn't as random as I always believed." She turned to face him. "Mostly I'm thinking that I'm glad you decided to help a frightened child that day, even though you had every reason to keep walking, even though no one would have blamed you for staying invisible." Ethan held her gaze. "I almost did keep walking. I almost decided it wasn't my business, that getting involved would only bring trouble." "What changed your mind?" He was silent for a moment. "I saw her hands. She was trying to communicate with anyone who might understand. And I remembered what that was like, to have something to bone and no way to say it." His voice dropped lower. "My wife used to tell me that the universe sends us the people we need when we need them. I never believed her until that moment. Your daughter needed someone who could hear her silence. I needed a reason to stop being invisible." Amelia reached out and took his hand. "Thank you for hearing her, for being brave enough to stop." Ethan turned her hand over, tracing the lines of her palm with his fingertip. "Thank you for seeing me, for believing I was worth fighting for." They stayed that way as the light shifted from gold to pink to deep blue, two people who had found something unexpected in the wreckage of their lives. Outside, the city hummed with its endless energy, millions of stories unfolding simultaneously, most of them invisible to everyone except the people living them. But this story was no longer invisible. This story was beginning to be heard. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity, apex dynamics facing mounting pressure from shareholders and regulatory agencies that agreed to settlement talks. The negotiations were contentious, with both sides fighting for every advantage, but the fundamental outcome was never in doubt. Apex would surrender its claim to the SignLink technology and pay substantial damages. In exchange, they would avoid a full trial that might expose even more damaging evidence. Ethan insisted on only one non-negotiable term: the settlement must include a public acknowledgement that the original acquisition had been improper. He did not demand an admission of fraud, understanding that no corporation would accept such language. But he needed the record to show that something had gone wrong, that the narrative of his disgrace had been built on foundations that could not withstand scrutiny. Apex resisted this demand more fiercely than any other. Their lawyers argued that such language would expose them to additional liability. Their PR team warned that it would be seen as an admission of guilt, regardless of the specific wording. But Amelia's team held firm, and eventually Apex capitulated. The settlement announcement came on a Tuesday morning, timed to coincide with the opening of financial markets. The statement acknowledged that the original acquisition of SignLink Technologies had been conducted under circumstances that raised significant legal questions. It announced the creation of a fund to support research and services for individuals with speech disabilities. And it revealed that the core SignLink technology would be donated to a newly formed nonprofit organization, Hope Speaks Foundation. The financial press covered the settlement extensively, analyzing its implications for both companies and the broader technology industry. But the human interest story that emerged alongside the business coverage was the one that captured public attention. Janitor who invented revolutionary technology finally gets justice, the billionaire and the cleaning man. How a CEO's conscience changed everything from mopping floors to making history. The Ethan Cole story. The profiles and interviews came fast and relentless. Ethan, who had spent 5 years cultivating invisibility, suddenly found himself the subject of intense public interest. He handled the attention with the same quiet dignity he had shown throughout the ordeal, deflecting questions about his personal struggles and redirecting conversations toward the work that lay ahead. Amelia stood beside him through every interview, every press conference, every public appearance. They made an unlikely pair, the elegant CEO in her designer suits and the former janitor who still looked slightly uncomfortable in formal clothes. But there was something powerful about their partnership, a visual reminder that justice could transcend the barriers of class and circumstance. The Hope Speaks Foundation officially launched 6 months after the settlement. The opening ceremony was held in a converted warehouse space in Oakland that had been transformed into the foundation's headquarters. Hundreds of people attended, donors and supporters and families whose children had already benefited from the foundation's early programs. Leia stood at the front of the crowd holding Ben's hand, both children wearing matching t-shirts that bore the foundation's logo, 2 hands forming the sign for hope. When Ethan took the stage to speak, she watched him with an expression of fierce pride that made Amelia's heart swell. Ethan's speech was simple and direct, delivered without notes or teleprompters. He talked about his wife Grace and her belief in the power of communication to transform lives. He talked about the children he had worked with over the years, the ones who had taught him that silence was just another language waiting to be understood. And he talked about the woman who had seen him when no one else did, who had believed in him when he had stopped believing in himself. "I spent 5 years thinking I had lost everything that mattered," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion visible on his face. "I was wrong. I had my son. I had my purpose. And I was about to meet someone who would show me that the world still contained more kindness than cruelty, more hope than despair." He turned to look at Amelia standing at the edge of the stage. "I walked into a building every day thinking I was invisible. She saw me. She heard my silence. And she decided that my story deserved to be told." He paused, letting the words settle over the crowd. "That's what we're here to do, to see the people who have been made invisible, to hear the voices that have been silenced, to tell the stories that deserve to be told." The applause that followed was thunderous, a wave of sound that filled the warehouse and spilled out into the Oakland streets. Amelia watched through tears as children signed along with their parents, as families embraced, as the community that had formed around this cause celebrated the beginning of something new. Later, after the crowds had dispersed and the catering staff was cleaning up, she found Ethan standing alone on the loading dock behind the building. The night air was cool and clear, the city lights twinkling in the distance like earthbound stars. She joined him without speaking, standing close enough to feel his warmth without quite touching. They had maintained careful boundaries throughout the ordeal, both aware of how their relationship might be perceived, both protective of their children and their reputations. But something had shifted during the months of struggle and triumph, something that neither of them had named, but both of them felt. Ethan spoke first, his voice soft in the darkness. "When I was a janitor in your building, I used to imagine what my life might have been like if things had gone differently. If Apex hadn't stolen SignLink. If Grace hadn't..." He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Amelia waited, giving him space to find his words. "I imagined a different version of myself. Someone successful, respected, making a difference in the world. I thought that person was gone forever, that he had died along with everything else I lost." He turned to face her. "But now I understand something I didn't before. That person was never gone. He was just waiting. Waiting for someone to remind him that he still existed." Amelia reached out and took his hand. "You were always there, Ethan. You were always the person who would stop to help a frightened child even when no one was watching. That's who you are. That's who you've always been." He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Thank you for everything." She moved closer, close enough to feel his breath on her face. "Don't thank me. This isn't over. This is just the beginning." "The beginning of what?" Amelia smiled, feeling the weight of the past 14 months lift slightly from her shoulders. "I don't know yet, but I think we're going to find out together." Behind them, through the open door of the warehouse, they could hear Leia and Ben laughing as they chased each other around the empty tables. The sound carried on the night air, bright and clear and full of promise, the sound of children who had found their voices and were not afraid to use them. The city hummed around them, millions of stories unfolding in the darkness, most of them invisible to everyone except the people living them. But this story had found its audience. This story would be remembered. Amelia leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder and watched the lights of Oakland flicker in the distance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, new opportunities to build something meaningful from the wreckage of the past. But tonight, standing in the cool darkness with the man who had helped her daughter smile again, she allowed herself to simply be. The journey that had begun with a scream in a marble lobby had carried them further than either of them could have imagined. Where it would end, no one could say. But for the first time in a very long time, Amelia Hart was not afraid of the future. She was ready to meet it. The months following the foundation's launch brought challenges that none of them had anticipated. Success, as Amelia discovered, created its own set of problems that could not be solved with determination alone, but required patience, diplomacy, and a willingness to navigate the treacherous waters of public attention. Hope Speaks had captured the imagination of the public in ways that exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Donations poured in from across the country, from wealthy philanthropists and ordinary families alike. Media requests multiplied exponentially, with producers and journalists clamoring for access to Ethan Talea, to the story that had become a symbol of justice prevailing against corporate greed. The foundation's waiting list for services grew longer each week as families with children who could not speak sought the help that Ethan had promised to provide. The demand was overwhelming, and with it came the inevitable growing pains of an organization expanding faster than its infrastructure could support. Ethan found himself pulled in a dozen directions simultaneously, trying to maintain his direct work with children while also responding to the administrative demands of a rapidly growing nonprofit. He had never wanted to be an executive, had deliberately avoided the trappings of corporate leadership, even when SignLink was at its peak, and now he found himself drowning in the very responsibilities he had hoped to escape. Amelia watched the strain accumulate on his shoulders with growing concern. She saw the way exhaustion carved deeper lines around his eyes each week, the way his patience frayed at the edges when yet another reporter demanded an interview or another donor expected personal attention. He was burning himself out, giving everything to a cause he believed in while leaving nothing for himself. One evening in late spring, she found him alone in his office at the foundation headquarters, surrounded by stacks of paperwork that seemed to multiply no matter how many hours he worked. The cleaning staff had long since gone home, and the building was silent except for the distant hum of traffic on the street below. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him struggle with a grant application that was due the following morning. His pen moved across the page in fits and starts, crossing out words and rewriting them, his frustration evident in every gesture. Her voice was gentle when she finally spoke. "You know we have staff who can handle that." Ethan looked up, startled by her presence. The exhaustion in his face was starker in the harsh fluorescent light, and she felt her heart constrict with worry. "The staff went home hours ago. This has to be submitted by 9 tomorrow morning, and I still don't understand half of what they're asking for." Amelia crossed the room and took the papers from his hands, setting them aside despite his protests. "Then it will be late. The world will not end. The grant is worth $200,000. That's enough to fund our entire summer program. And there will be other grants, other opportunities." She pulled a chair close to his desk and sat down facing him directly. "But there is only one of you, and if you work yourself into the ground, all of this falls apart." Ethan slumped back in his chair, the fight draining out of him. "I don't know how to do this, Amelia. I know how to work with children. I know how to teach sign language and develop communication strategies. But all of this," he gestured at the paperwork surrounding them, "this isn't what I signed up for." Amelia nodded slowly. "I know, and that's my fault." He looked at her with confusion. "How is any of this your fault?" "Because I pushed you into a spotlight you never wanted. I thought that giving you back your work would be enough, that you could pick up where you left off and everything would fall into place." She shook her head, acknowledging her mistake. "I didn't consider that the world had changed, that you had changed, that what you needed now might be different from what you needed 5 years ago." Ethan was silent for a long moment, processing her words. Then he sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of months of accumulated pressure. "What I need is to help children. That's all I've ever wanted. But every time I try to focus on that work, something else demands my attention. Donors want meetings. Journalists want stories. Board members want reports. The children I'm supposed to be helping get pushed to the margins of my own calendar." Amelia reached out and took his hand, feeling the tension in his fingers. "Then we change the structure. We hire people to handle the things you shouldn't be handling. We protect your time the way we would protect any valuable resource. We can't afford more staff. The budget is already stretched thin. Then I'll fund it personally. Consider it an investment in the mission. Ethan shook his head firmly. I can't let you do that. You've already given so much. The foundation needs to stand on its own. The foundation needs you functional and focused. Everything else is secondary. Amelia squeezed his hand. Let me help. That's all I'm asking. Let me use my resources to solve a problem that resources can solve, so you can focus on the problems that only you can address. The resistance in his eyes softened, gradually replaced by something that looked like gratitude mixed with relief. You always know exactly what to say. Not always, but I'm learning. She smiled. We both are. They sat together in the quiet office as the night deepened around them, two people who had found in each other something neither had expected. The romantic dimension of their relationship remained unspoken, a careful dance around feelings that both acknowledged but neither named. There were the children to consider, Leia and Ben, who had become as close as siblings and who might be confused or threatened by changes in the dynamic between their parents. There was the public scrutiny that followed both of them, the constant attention that would intensify if their relationship became something more than professional partnership. And there was the simple uncertainty of two people who had been so badly wounded by loss that they approached any new attachment with caution. But the connection between them was undeniable, growing stronger with each shared challenge and quiet moment. Amelia found herself thinking about Ethan at odd hours, wondering what he was doing, hoping he was taking care of himself. She noticed the way her heart lifted when she saw his name on her phone, the way conversations with him felt easier and more honest than conversations with anyone else. She was falling in love, and she knew it, and the knowledge both thrilled and terrified her. The complications she had anticipated arrived sooner than expected. A tabloid website published photographs of Amelia and Ethan leaving the foundation headquarters late at night, their body language intimate even if their behavior was innocent. The headline screamed speculation. CEO and janitor is Heart Biotech's boss having an affair with her charity project. The article was cruel in the way that tabloid journalism often was, reducing both of them to caricatures while implying that their entire relationship was somehow scandalous. It questioned Amelia's motives for supporting Ethan, suggesting that her advocacy had been driven by romantic interest rather than principle. It dredged up the circumstances of Grace Cole's death, implying that Ethan was a man who drove women to destruction. It even mentioned Leia and Ben, speculating about how the children would be affected by their parents' inappropriate relationship. Amelia read the article with a cold fury that reminded her of the early days of the legal battle against Apex. She had thought that chapter was closed, that victory in the courtroom had ended the attacks on their character. But some enemies never accepted defeat, and the machinery of character assassination was always available to those willing to pay for it. She called Rachel immediately. I want to know who planted this story and who paid for it. Rachel's voice was calm but serious. I'll look into it, but Amelia, you need to be prepared for what we might find. These things don't usually trace back to a single source. I don't care how complicated it is. Someone is trying to hurt us, and I want to know who. The investigation took several weeks, during which the tabloid story spread across the internet like a virus. Other outlets picked up the speculation, adding their own embellishments and interpretations. Social media exploded with opinions, some defending Amelia and Ethan, others condemning them with the self-righteous fury that characterized so much online discourse. Through it all, Amelia and Ethan maintained a united front. They did not hide from the attention or retreat from public view. Instead, they continued their work, with the foundation appearing together at events and interviews, refusing to let the speculation derail their mission. Their composure in the face of attack only seemed to inflame their critics further, but it also won them new admirers who respected their dignity under pressure. The children thankfully remained largely shielded from the controversy. Leia's security detail had been strengthened after the earlier incidents with paparazzi, and Ben attended a school that took privacy seriously. Neither child was aware of the specific allegations being made about their parents, though both sensed the tension that accompanied any mention of news or media. Rachel finally traced the source of the tabloid story to an unlikely origin. The initial tip had come from an anonymous account that digital forensics eventually linked to a former employee of Apex Dynamics, a public relations specialist who had been let go during the company's restructuring following the settlement. The motivation appeared to be personal rather than corporate, the action of a disgruntled individual rather than an organized campaign. But the damage was done regardless of the source. Amelia considered her options carefully. She could pursue legal action against the tabloid, but that would only extend the story's life in the public consciousness. She could ignore the allegations entirely, but silence might be interpreted as confirmation. She could issue a denial, but denials often sounded defensive regardless of their truth. In the end, she chose a different path. She called a press conference not to address the rumors directly, but to announce a major expansion of the Hope Speaks Foundation. The expansion would include new facilities in 3 additional cities, partnerships with school districts across the country, and a research initiative to develop improved communication technologies for children with speech disabilities. The announcement was significant enough to dominate news cycles, effectively burying the tabloid speculation beneath more substantial coverage. During the press conference, a reporter asked the inevitable question about her relationship with Ethan Cole. Amelia's response became the most quoted moment of the event. "Mr. Cole and I share a commitment to helping children who have been silenced by circumstance find their voices. We share a belief that every person deserves to be heard regardless of their abilities or their background. We share the experience of having lost people we loved and having found purpose in the wreckage of that loss." She paused, her eyes sweeping the room with calm authority. "What we choose to share beyond that is our own business. I will not dignify speculation with response, and I will not allow distraction to divert us from work that matters." The room fell silent. Then slowly applause began spreading through the assembled journalists until it filled the space. Amelia nodded once, acknowledging the response, and moved on to questions about the expansion plans. Ethan watched the press conference from backstage, his heart full of an emotion he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Pride in her, gratitude for her, and something else, something deeper that he had been afraid to name. When she joined him after the event, he took her hand without speaking and held it as they walked to the car. The gesture said everything that words could not, a declaration of solidarity and affection that transcended the boundaries they had carefully maintained. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat together on the deck of Amelia's home, watching the moon rise over the Pacific. The air was cool and salt-scented, carrying the eternal rhythm of waves against the cliffs below. Ethan broke the silence first. "What you said today about what we share, did you mean it?" Amelia turned to look at him, her face illuminated by moonlight. "Every word." "Then maybe it's time we talked about what else we share." His voice was hesitant, vulnerable in a way she had rarely heard. "What else we might want to share?" She felt her heart accelerate the moment she had both anticipated and feared finally arriving. "Ethan, I need you to understand something. I'm not good at this. I wasn't even good at it with David, and he and I had years to figure it out. I work too much. I prioritize wrong. I build walls when I should be building bridges." "I know." His response was simple, accepting. "I'm not good at it either. I shut down when things get hard. I convince myself that I don't deserve happiness. I've spent 5 years punishing myself for failures that weren't entirely my fault." Amelia felt tears prick at her eyes. "Then what are we doing?" Ethan reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle and sure. "We're trying. Despite everything we know about ourselves, despite every reason we have to be afraid we're trying. That has to count for something." She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. "I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to hurt Ben. I don't want this to complicate everything we've built. Life is complicated. Love is complicated. That doesn't mean we should run from it." The word hung in the air between them, spoken for the first time, acknowledged at last. Love. Such a small word for such an enormous feeling. Amelia opened her eyes and met his gaze. "I'm terrified." "So am I." He smiled, and in that smile she saw the man he had been before loss had reshaped him, the man of hope and vision who had wanted to give voice to the voiceless. "But I've learned something in the past year. Being terrified doesn't mean you stop moving forward. It just means you're paying attention." She laughed despite herself, the sound that released some of the tension she had been carrying. "When did you become so wise? I had a good teacher." He leaned closer, his forehead touching hers. "A woman who reminded me that invisible people are still worth seeing, that broken things can still be beautiful, that starting over is not the same as giving up." Amelia closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and questioning, but it carried the weight of months of unspoken feeling. When they separated, both of them were breathing harder, both of them aware that something fundamental had shifted. "So what happens now?" she asked. Ethan took her hand and interlaced their fingers. "Now we figure it out together, one day at a time, one challenge at a time. The way we've been doing all along, except now we stop pretending we're just colleagues." The moon continued its arc across the sky as they sat together, no longer pretending, no longer afraid. The road ahead would not be easy, they both knew that. There would be complications with the children, adjustments to their public personas, negotiations between two lives that had been shaped by solitary grief. But there would also be joy, the kind of joy that comes from finding unexpected connection in unexpected places. The foundation continued to grow in the months that followed its reach, shining as Amelia had announced, its impact multiplying as Ethan returned his focus to direct service. New staff members took on the administrative burden that had been crushing him, freeing him to do the work that had always been his calling. The waiting list shortened as capacity increased, and families across the country began to experience the transformation that effective communication could bring. Leia flourished under the continued attention. Her sign language had become fluent, and she served as an unofficial ambassador for the foundation, demonstrating to other children that silence did not mean isolation. Her voice had not returned, the psychological barrier still holding firm, but she no longer seemed troubled by its absence. She had found other ways to be heard, and those ways were enough. Ben remained her constant companion, their friendship deepening into something that resembled siblinghood. He looked out for her with the protective instincts of an older brother, and she challenged him with the stubborn determination that was her mother's legacy. Together, they navigated the complicated terrain of being children whose parents were becoming something more than friends, and they did so with a resilience that continually amazed the adults around them. The public eventually lost interest in speculating about Amelia and Ethan's relationship. Other scandals emerged, other stories captured attention, and the billionaire and the former janitor faded from tabloid consciousness. Those who followed the foundation's work knew that the two were partners in every sense, but the nature of that partnership had become unremarkable, simply another detail, in a story that had already provided more than enough drama. As spring turned to summer and summer stretched toward fall, the sense of crisis that had defined the past 2 years gradually gave way to something more sustainable. The legal battles were concluded, the corporate enemies neutralized, the public narrative firmly established. What remained was the work itself, the daily practice of helping children find their voices, the slow accumulation of small victories that added up to something meaningful. Amelia found herself thinking less about protection and more about possibility. The walls she had built around herself and Leia had not disappeared entirely, but they had become more permeable, allowing connection where once there had been only defense. She still worked too much, still struggled to balance professional demands with personal presence, but the struggle no longer felt desperate. She was learning slowly to trust that the world would not collapse if she loosened her grip. Ethan continued to heal, though the scars of his losses would never fully fade. Grace's memory remained with him, a presence that shaped his work and informed his compassion. But he no longer felt defined by her absence, no longer believed that happiness was something he had forfeited forever. He had found a new life in the ruins of the old one, and that new life had room for joy. The children grew as children do, their personalities crystallizing into forms that would carry them into adulthood. Leia developed a passion for visual art, spending hours creating drawings and paintings that expressed the things she could not say aloud. Ben discovered a gift for mathematics, his analytical mind finding patterns in numbers the way his father had once found patterns in communication. They encouraged each other's interests, different enough to avoid competition, but close enough to share in each other's successes. And through it all, the work continued. Children who had been silent learned to sign. Families who had been isolated found community. Technologies that had been stolen were restored to their original purpose, serving the people they had been designed to help. The mission that Ethan had pursued since the beginning of his career, the mission that corporate greed had interrupted but could not destroy, moved forward day by day. Hope Speaks indeed. The anniversary of Hope Speaks Foundation arrived on a morning that seemed designed for celebration. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of the newly constructed center in downtown San Francisco, illuminating the open spaces that had been designed with children in mind. Bright colors adorned the walls and artwork created by the young people. The foundation served each piece a testament to the voices that had been discovered within these rooms. Amelia stood at the edge of the main hall, watching the final preparations unfold. Caterers arranged tables with precision. Audio technicians tested microphones and speakers. Security personnel conducted their careful sweeps, ensuring that the hundreds of guests expected would be safe throughout the event. 1 year ago, she had stood in a converted warehouse in Oakland and announced the beginning of something new. Now that something had grown into this is a purpose-built facility that would serve as the flagship of a national network. The journey from there to here had been marked by obstacles she could never have anticipated. Funding challenges had nearly derailed construction twice. A key contractor had abandoned the project midway through, forcing them to find replacement workers on an impossible timeline. The city had raised unexpected permitting issues that required months of negotiation to resolve. Each problem had seemed insurmountable in the moment, and each had eventually yielded to persistence and creativity. Ethan appeared beside her, his presence now as familiar as her own heartbeat. He wore a suit that actually fit him properly, a departure from the borrowed formal wear of earlier events, and his face held an expression of wonder that she had come to recognize. He still marveled at what they had built, still seemed surprised that dreams he had abandoned could reassemble themselves into reality. His voice was soft, meant only for her. I keep expecting to wake up, to find out this was all some elaborate fantasy my mind constructed while I pushed a mop through empty hallways. Amelia took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. If this is a dream, I don't want to wake up either. They had stopped hiding their relationship months ago, the careful boundaries giving way to the simple truth of what they felt. The transition had been easier than either expected. Leia and Ben had adapted with the resilience of children who had already survived worse disruptions, accepting the change in their parents' dynamic as simply another evolution in a life that had already contained so many. The public had moved on to other scandals, other stories, leaving Amelia and Ethan to build their partnership in relative peace. The grand opening ceremony was scheduled to begin at noon, but guests had been arriving since 10. Donors and board members mingled with families whose children had been helped by the foundation. Politicians and celebrities who had lent their names to the cause posed for photographs in front of displays showcasing the organization's work. Media crews set up their equipment at designated locations, preparing to broadcast the event to audiences across the country. Amelia's board chair approached with the barely contained anxiety that characterized her management style. Sandra Chen had been skeptical of the foundation, at first worried about the distraction it might create from Heart Biotech's core mission. But she had watched its growth with increasing admiration, eventually becoming one of its most vocal supporters on the corporate board. Her words came rapid fire, a checklist of concerns. The governor's office just confirmed she'll be arriving at 11:45. The keynote address needs to be moved up by 10 minutes to accommodate her schedule, and the sign language interpreters are asking about sightlines for the main stage presentation. Amelia nodded, her mind already adapting to the changes. Move the opening remarks to 11:50, that gives us buffer if the governor runs late, and have someone walk the interpreters through the stage layout now before the room fills up. Sandra hurried off to implement the adjustments, leaving Amelia and Ethan alone again in their small bubble of calm within the surrounding chaos. Ethan watched the activity with the detached amusement of someone who had learned to let others handle logistics. Remember when it was just you and me and a folder full of documents, trying to figure out how to fight a corporation that seemed invincible? Amelia smiled at the memory. I remember thinking we were probably going to lose, that the best we could hope for was making enough noise to embarrass them. And now look at us. He gestured at the hall, at the hundreds of people filling it, at the evidence of impact that surrounded them. Building something that will outlast both of us. The thought struck Amelia with unexpected force. She had spent so much energy on the immediate battles, the daily crises, and quarterly milestones, that she had rarely considered the long-term implications of what they were creating. But Ethan was right. Hope Speaks had grown beyond them, had become an institution with its own momentum and mission. Whatever happened to its founders, the work would continue. The ceremony began precisely on schedule despite the last-minute adjustments. The governor delivered remarks that praised the foundation's innovative approach to serving children with communication challenges. Board members and major donors were recognized with the ritual appreciation that such events required. Video testimonials from families across the country played on screens throughout the hall, their stories of transformation moving many in the audience to tears. Then it was Ethan's turn to speak. He mounted the stage with a confidence that would have been unimaginable 2 years ago when he had been a man who cultivated invisibility as a survival strategy. The audience fell silent as he approached the podium, their attention focused on the figure who had become the public face of a movement. He did not use notes. He never did. His words came from a place deeper than preparation, drawn from the well of experience that had shaped his understanding of what it meant to be silenced and what it meant to be heard. 2 years ago, I was cleaning floors in a building I used to dream of owning. His voice carried clearly through the speakers, reaching every corner of the vast hall. I had convinced myself that my story was over, that everything I had built and lost was gone forever, that the best I could hope for was to become invisible enough that the world would forget I had ever existed. He paused, letting the words settle over the audience. I was wrong. The admission hung in the air, simple and profound. I was wrong because I had forgotten something essential. Silence is not the same as disappearance. Being unheard is not the same as having nothing to say. Every person in this room, every child we serve, every family we support, they carry voices within them. Our job is not to give them those voices. Our job is to help them find the voices they already have. He turned slightly, his gaze finding Amelia in the audience. I found my voice again because someone saw me when I had stopped believing I was worth seeing. Someone heard me when I had stopped believing I had anything worth saying. Someone fought for me when I had stopped believing I was worth fighting for. The emotion in his voice was unmistakable now, raw and honest, in a way that public speakers rarely allowed themselves to be. That's what we do here. We see people, we hear people, we fight for people, not because they can't fight for themselves, but because sometimes we all need someone in our corner, someone who believes in us when we've stopped believing in ourselves. He straightened his tone, shifting from personal to visionary. In the next 5 years, we're going to expand to every state in this country. We're going to develop technologies that make communication accessible to everyone, regardless of their abilities or circumstances. We're going to train thousands of specialists who will carry this mission into communities we haven't even imagined yet. His voice rose with conviction. And we're going to do it because silence is too heavy a burden for any child to carry alone. Because every voice matters. Because hope speaks even when words cannot. And the applause that followed was thunderous, a wave of sound that seemed to shake the walls of the building. Ethan stood at the podium, absorbing the response, his face reflecting an emotion that mixed gratitude with something approaching disbelief. 2 years ago, he had been invisible. Now he stood in the light, seen by hundreds, his story an inspiration rather than a cautionary tale. But the ceremony was not over. As the applause faded, Ethan raised his hand for silence. There's one more thing I want to share with you today. His voice had changed again, becoming softer, more intimate. A moment that means more to me than any speech or statistic or strategic plan. He turned toward the side of the stage where Amelia now stood with Laya and Ben. The children had been waiting backstage throughout the ceremony, prepared for a moment that had been planned in secret for weeks. Laya walked forward slowly, her small form somehow commanding attention despite the vastness of the stage. She wore a dress that Amelia had helped her choose, simple and elegant, and in her hands she carried a device that glinted in the stage lights. It was the latest prototype of SignLink 2 refined through months of development, capable of translating sign language into spoken words with remarkable accuracy and naturalness. The audience watched in hushed anticipation as Laya took her place beside Ethan. Her dark eyes swept across the crowd, showing nervousness, but also determination. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the reason she had practiced for hours each day, the goal that had given focus to her recovery. Her hands rose and began to move, forming signs with the fluency that months of instruction had developed. The device in her hands processed each gesture, translating them into synthesized speech that carried through the hall's speakers. My name is Laya Hart. The voice was not her own, not the voice she had lost in the aftermath of her father's death, but it was a voice nonetheless, her voice shaped by her words, carrying her meaning. I am 7 years old. I could not speak for a long time because something sad happened to me and my family. She paused, her hands trembling slightly before resuming their movement. But then I met someone who understood my silence. He showed me that I could still talk, just in a different way. He showed me that being quiet doesn't mean being alone. Tears were streaming down faces throughout the audience. Amelia watched from the side of the stage, her own eyes burning, her heart so full, it seemed impossible that her chest could contain it. Leia's signs continued, the device translating faithfully. My mom used to be very scared. She wanted to protect me from everything. But now she knows that protecting me doesn't mean keeping me away from the world. It means helping me find my place in it. She turned to look at Ethan, her expression softening with affection. Mr. Ethan taught me how to use my hands to speak. He and his son Ben became part of our family, not because anyone told them to, but because love finds people who need it. The audience was completely silent now, every person holding their breath as this child delivered a message that no adult could have crafted. My dad died 2 years ago. I miss him every day. Leia's hands moved more slowly now, the signs heavy with the weight of what they expressed. But he would want me to be happy. He would want my mom to be happy. He would want us to have people who love us and take care of us. She turned back to face the audience directly. I want to say something that I've been practicing for a long time, something I want everyone to hear. Her hands stilled. The device fell silent, and then impossibly miraculously, Leia opened her mouth and spoke. Her voice was small, rough, from years of disuse, barely above a whisper. But the microphone caught it, amplified. It carried it to every corner of the hall. I love my family, all of them, the old and the new. The sound that followed was not quite applause and not quite cheering. It was something more primal, a collective release of emotion that had built throughout her presentation and now erupted in response to those simple words. People rose to their feet. Some sobbed openly. Others embraced strangers beside them, united in the witness of something extraordinary. Amelia was already moving, crossing the stage to gather her daughter in her arms. The device clattered to the floor, forgotten in the intensity of the embrace. Behind them, Ethan lifted Ben, who had watched his friend's triumph with tears streaming down his own face. The four of them stood together on the stage, a family forged in the crucible of loss and rebuilt through the patient work of love. The applause continued, rolling over to them in waves, but they barely heard it. In that moment, there was only the tight circle of their embrace, the beating of hearts that had found their way home. Later, after the ceremony had ended and the guests had departed and the cleaning crews had begun their work, Amelia stood on the roof of the new building and watched the sun set over the city. The skyline of San Francisco stretched before her, familiar landmarks, punctuating a landscape she had known her entire adult life. This was the city where she had built her career, lost her husband, found her purpose, and discovered love again. It held her history in its streets and buildings, a map of everything she had been and everything she had become. Ethan joined her as the last light faded from the sky. He carried 2 glasses of champagne, a small celebration for what they had accomplished and what they had witnessed. She took the glass he offered and clinked it against his. To hope speaks. He shook his head slightly. To hope, period. The kind that doesn't need a foundation or a building or a press conference. The kind that just exists in the spaces between people who care about each other. They drank in comfortable silence, watching the city lights emerge as darkness settled over the bay. Somewhere below, their children were being looked after by staff who had become extended family, trusted with the care of the 2 people who mattered most in the world. Amelia spoke without looking at him, her voice carrying thoughts she had been holding for days. I want to ask you something important. Ethan turned to face her. Anything. She met his eyes, finding in them the steadiness that had become her anchor through turbulent seas. Move in with us, officially. You and Ben. Stop pretending we're 2 separate households when we haven't really been for months. The question was not unexpected, but it still carried weight. They had been building toward this moment incrementally, each step forward tested and confirmed before the next was taken. But there was a difference between gradual progress and explicit commitment, between the assumption of togetherness and its declaration. Ethan's response came without hesitation. Yes. Amelia felt something release in her chest, a tension she had not realized she was carrying. Just like that. Just like that. He set down his glass and took both her hands in his. I've been waiting for you to ask, or working up the courage to ask you myself. I wasn't sure which of us would get there first. She laughed, the sound carrying across the rooftop and dissolving into the night air. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Two people who run major organizations, who face down corporate enemies and media scrutiny and impossible odds. But we can't figure out how to have a simple conversation about where we want to live. Simple conversations are harder than complicated ones. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. Complicated ones have procedures and protocols. Simple ones require honesty. Amelia leaned forward and kissed him, tasting champagne and possibility. When she pulled back, she kept her forehead pressed against his, unwilling to create distance. I want to build a life with you. The words came easier now that the first barrier had fallen. A real life. Not just the foundation and the public appearances and the work, though I want all of that too. I want Sunday mornings and homework supervision and arguments about whose turn it is to take out the garbage. I want ordinary. Ethan's voice was rough with emotion. I had ordinary once. I lost it. I never thought I'd want it again. And now I want it more than I've wanted anything in years. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to watch our children grow up together. I want to grow old arguing about whose turn it is to take out the garbage. They stood together on the rooftop as the stars emerged overhead, two people who had found in each other something neither had expected. The path that led them here had been marked by tragedy and injustice, by corporate greed and personal loss. But it had also been marked by courage and kindness, by the willingness to see beyond surfaces and the determination to fight for what was right. Below them, the city hummed with its endless energy. Millions of lives unfolded in apartments and houses and shelters, each one a story of struggle and hope. The Hope Speaks Foundation would touch some of those lives, would help children find their voices and families find their strength. But the foundation was only one expression of something larger, a principle that Ethan had articulated in his speech, and that they both tried to embody in their daily choices. Every person deserves to be heard. Every voice matters. Every silence can be transformed into speech, given the right support and the right belief. Amelia thought about Laya's words on the stage, the ones spoken through the device, and the ones spoken with her own recovering voice. Her daughter had found something beyond communication in the past 2 years. She had found confidence and purpose, a sense of herself as someone who could contribute to the world rather than simply endure it. That transformation had not come from therapy alone, or from technology alone, or from any single intervention. It had come from the accumulation of small moments of patient attention and persistent love of adults who refused to give up on a child who had every reason to give up on herself. The same principle applied to all of them. Amelia had been transformed by the process as much as Laya had. The woman who had built walls around her heart, and her daughter who had tried to control every variable and eliminate every risk, had learned to open herself to the vulnerability that love required. She was still protective, still driven, still prone to working too much and worrying too deeply. But she was also softer, more willing to trust, more capable of joy. Ethan had undergone his own transformation. The invisible man who had pushed a mop through corporate lobbies had reclaimed his identity as an innovator and leader. But more importantly, he had reclaimed his capacity for hope. The darkness that had settled over him after Grace's death had not disappeared entirely, but it had lifted enough to allow light back in. He could laugh again, could dream again, could love again, without feeling that he was betraying the past. And the children Ben and Laya had found in each other the sibling bond that neither would have had otherwise. They were not related by blood, but blood was only one way to build a family. They shared something more important, a mutual understanding forged in the fires of loss and cooled in the waters of recovery. They would grow up together, would support each other through the challenges of adolescence and young adulthood, would carry the lessons of their childhood into whatever lives they eventually built. The future stretched before them, uncertain but no longer frightening. There would be obstacles ahead, there always were. The foundation would face crises that tested its resilience. Their relationship would weather storms that challenged its strength. The children would encounter difficulties that no amount of parental love could entirely prevent. Life did not become easy simply because you had survived hard things. It became bearable because you had learned that survival was possible. Amelia pulled back from Ethan's embrace and looked into his eyes. Are you ready for this? For all of it, the chaos and the complexity, and the million small decisions that make up a life. Ethan's smile was answer enough, but he gave her words as well. I've been ready since the day I saw a frightened child in a lobby and decided that helping her was more important than staying invisible. I just didn't know what I was getting ready for. He took her hand and led her toward the door that would take them back inside, back to their children, back to the life they were building together. Let's go home. The words settled over Amelia like a blessing. Home. Not a place defined by architecture or geography, but a feeling created by the people who shared it. She had a home again, a real one with people who loved her and whom she loved in return. As they descended the stairs and collected their children and made their way to the car that would carry them to the house on the cliffs above the Pacific, Amelia allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in a very long time. Complete. Not the completion that came from achieving goals or finishing projects. Something deeper, something that had nothing to do with accomplishment and everything to do with connection. She was part of something larger than herself, woven into a fabric of relationships that gave her life meaning beyond any individual achievement. The drive home was filled with the children's chatter, Leia signing rapidly and occasionally speaking in the halting voice she was still learning to trust, Ben interpreting and adding his own commentary, both of them processing the excitement of the day in the way that children do. Amelia and Ethan exchanged glances in the rearview mirror, small smiles that communicated volumes about the gratitude they felt for this ordinary chaos. When they arrived at the house, the moon was rising over the ocean, casting silver light across the waves. The children ran ahead, eager to continue their conversation in the living room where they had spent so many hours together. Amelia and Ethan followed more slowly, savoring the moment. At the front door, Ethan paused. He turned to face the ocean, the wind carrying the salt smell that had become so familiar. You know, I used to dream about this, when I was mopping floors at 3 a.m, trying not to think about everything I had lost. I would imagine a life where I felt whole again, where I had people who loved me, where the work I did mattered. He turned back to her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. I never imagined it would look like this. I never imagined it could be this good. Amelia took his face in her hands, the gesture tender and certain. Neither did I, and yet here we are. Here we are, he echoed. They entered the house together, leaving the door open for a moment to let the sound of the waves follow them in. The children's laughter drifted from the living room, bright and uncomplicated, the sound of healing made audible. Hope speaks, Amelia thought, in so many different voices. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it speaks in the voices of the people you love most.